Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 2 o'clock. I'd like to start on time here, and before we begin, I know that everybody's here, or a majority of you are here for the purpose of the tax exemption issue that's been raised by the OPA, and I'd ask the Senator Brooks if you can please join us on the table here. But before we begin that, I would like to first start out with recognize my colleagues that are here. We have Senator Tom Atta, we have Senator Mike Nicholas. But we'd like to bring up first and discuss one issue while I've got DRT in front of me. Bill 34-55, that was public law. It deals with the tax stamp, and I know that Senator Nicholas will make it pretty quick, and then we'll jump right into the GRT tax exemption. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the committee to indulge the question. When we passed Public Law 34-55, it included a 90-day period before, a 90-day period for the department to be able to prepare an implementation plan for the tax stamps. And just for the record, the tax stamps are for the cigarettes. We passed a law that would require those to all be stamped so that we can capture all the revenue and make sure that everything's being paid up front. The 90-day deadline for the implementation plan was last week, Friday. So I wanted to ask the department if they've completed the implementation plan. And it's actually timely with the nature of the conversation here today because, in the interest of trying to capture as much revenue as possible, that's one of the reasons why we passed Public Law 34-55. So if I can go ahead and get on the record at least a status update on the implementation plan that was supposed to be completed Friday.
Thank you, Senator. I guess what I can say right now is basically that we're still looking into it. We're still working it, Senator. I know there's a lot of things that we need to do, but we're still looking at it and also looking at as far as funding, trying to get the funding for it. So maybe we can, get an update maybe in a few weeks where we at with this particular public law.
Just for the record, the reason why we wrote that specific language in there for the implementation plan to be completed within 90 days is because we just don't want this particular issue to fall in that same trap that we seem to have with respect to rules and regs not getting drafted in time for us to actually have the law effective. The reason why we passed the bill was to capture the potentially lost cigarette tax revenue, and the effective date for the stamps was supposed to be pretty much October 1st of this calendar year, so that we could thereafter factor the revenue that's anticipated from the stamps, the increased revenue, factor that into the budget going forward. So I just wanted to put it on the record that we need that implementation plan to be completed. It was specifically written into the law so that we can not miss that deadline. So, Mr. Chairman, in light of the fact that the implementation plan has not been produced to Legislature in Guam and Magalahan in Guam as per the law, I'd like to request the committee stay on top of the issue, and perhaps we have a follow-up roundtable hearing before the conclusion of the month or at earliest of February.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
As a matter of
Chairman.
fact, we will.
Thank you.
We will have another roundtable. If not, because there are other pending OPA reports that I received this morning from the OPA, and we will need to discuss that with the department. There's a bunch of them. There's actually repeated findings, like the GRT today. It started on 2013, it's now 2017. But that being said, I'd like to also recognize the speaker. Senator B.J. Cruz also joined us, and Senator Fernando Esteves. Ladies and gentlemen, the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation now convenes this roundtable. Notice were given to the media. First notice was on Tuesday, December 19. Second notice on Wednesday, January 10. For the record, today is Tuesday, January 16, and the time is, we would use the time as 2 o'clock is when we started. The committee will hear and accept testimonies, both oral and written, on the following. The roundtable discussion, we have the Department of Revenue and Taxation representative, we have the Director, John Camacho, and the Deputy Director, Marie Benito. We also have Senator Brooks here, the OPA. General rules for the roundtable. The conduct of this roundtable shall be those testifying will be recognized in the order of signing up on the sign-in sheet. Written testimony may be read. Lengthy written testimony should be summarized to about 5 minutes. I know that some presentation will be on 5 minutes, but I think the audience will be willing to work with that. If you have any written testimony, please submit it to the committee so that we can make that available to all the legislative staff. Testimony shall be confined to the issues on hand, which is the GRT exemption. I would like to actually start out with the OPA, Mrs. Senator Brooks, to talk about the GRT exemption report that she submitted. She started out in 2013, and I think the 2017 is actually a follow-up to the 2013. And there may be some issues that have not been resolved, and I'd like her to present that. Also joining us today is Vice Speaker Senator Therese Terlai. And then followed by that would be the director and the deputy director to explain what's going on. And then I know I have a PowerPoint presentation will be presented by Mr. Shimizu from the Ambrose Inc. And I probably have a bunch of other folks that would like to join. We have Mr. Ken Leon Guerrero, and we also have Tim, I'm not too sure how you pronounce your name, Tim Kernahan? Oh, good, you know them. Where's Tim at? Tim, you please join us up on the table, Mr. Ken, and we'll get one more person up here, and that'll be Shimizu. Not you, Uncle Frank, not your son. There's another Shimizu, Daphne. Same family, different companies. So you got one more chair. No, we're pretty good. We also have Mr. Phil Flores, but we'll get you on the rebound when we're talking about the banks. Okay, Mr. Flores? And we will start with, I'd like to also recognize Senator Regine Lee, who's also here. Okay. Ms. Brooks? I will turn on the mic.
Ask Llewellyn Terlahi, who is the audit supervisor on this engagement, to sit next to me. Thank you very much, Senator San Agustin, for speaking to me. I'm really very happy that our audit of tax exemptions really drew a lot of response, and it's really the message in there as, so please don't shoot the messenger because you don't like the message, But let me just say this. This was an audit that we tried to do back in 2013, more than 5 years ago. And the reason why it was because it was requested. It was in fact requested to our speaker now. How much is we always talk about tax collections, tax revenues, but we don't also talk about what has the government of Guam given away in the form of tax credits, tax exemptions, and so on. One senator asked us also if we could do a holistic approach as to what that is. And I said, wow, that's, that was a lot, because even in our audit of real property taxes, we've talked about that. But I guess the timing of this particular report generated a lot of interest. Going back to why this report didn't come back out earlier in 2013 is because DRT at that time had a number of fundamental issues. And I just want to read a statement that from the Department of Interior, Earl Devaney, back in 2008, which I think is partly part of the problem that DRT has today, okay? Guam's efforts, and this is dated November 28, 2008, almost a decade later, just nearly a decade later. Guam's efforts to process and collect taxes are ineffective. DRT is hamstrung by the lack of adequate funding and staff, an inability to hire and retain qualified tax enforcement staff, and an ever-increasing workload and reliance on manual processes and outdated equipment. Fast forward today, when we did this audit, the same thing happened. It hasn't fundamentally changed. They are hamstrung by not enough people. The system that they have dates back to the 1980s, and that has been going back and forth. Whenever we've done an audit the data has not been reliable. You know, we had a lot of, we wanted to do a 5-year look back. We could not because we could not place reliance on that data. So we did 3 years. Now, what did that data show, okay? Well, the data showed on average, you know, that we have a lot of gross receipts tax exemptions. And of course, you know, when I spoke to the chamber about, not to the chamber, to the Rotary Club, you know, the lion's share of those exemptions is in the wholesale business. I guess the good news is, way back when, you know, we had barely 100 wholesalers. Today, we have over 600 wholesalers. But the foregone revenue and it comes from wholesale. Then all the other exemptions, and we have over 40+ exemptions, okay, of which $11 million in exemptions, nobody knows who got it because of the way the system is. You know, $11 million in tax revenue, rather, that we don't know. Again, we're here because that audit generated a lot of activity, and I'm glad to hear and see that the businesses are here to talk about it. I mean, we're even giving exemptions to wholesalers who pay to the military, okay, even that area. Now, it doesn't generate nearly as much tax, but the smallest one does generate about $600 million over a 3-year period, or $200 million a year that is not being taxed. And that's all this audit was to do, was to show. And what we said, when was the last time this government has looked at all of these exemptions to see, are they accomplishing the purpose for which the exemption was originally enacted? Like the Dave Santos Act is another one, okay? That's number 3 from the top, you know. But the lion's share is the wholesale industry, you know. And if you were to add up all the rest, they would make up, you know, off-island sales is another one, and so on. So what this audit did was just to quantify, merely quantify what the government of Guam has allowed all these years. But our data is only for 3 years, so I don't know how much further this can go back. And now with the Trump tax cuts, you know, we're hearing, you know, we were just meeting this morning with Department of Administration trying to figure out, okay, which corporate income tax, individual, and withholding, trying to figure out which items, what areas of these are going to be reduced as a result of the new Trump tax going into effect in fiscal year, for calendar year taxpayers 2018, and I'm not sure from a tax point of view, and my tax partner back there, Bob Steffi, can tell you that, but DRT fundamentally, you know, with all the, is hard pressed because of antiquated systems, not enough tax enforcement officials, and all antiquated systems. Even in just a recent audit I did, I mean, that the Inspector General did back in 2014, it said that DRT is ineffective in determining what defense contractors are paying gross receipts tax. And even in that audit, they identified 6 contractors who may possibly owe the government of Guam $414,000 in gross receipts tax because DRT's system of identifying is ineffective. And like I said, even in our own, it amounted up to $11.5 million of tax exemptions that were unknown. We couldn't categorize them into the system, which area it went to. So I'm glad the report has generated a lot of interest, and maybe this is the time now for the legislature as well as the administration to take a holistic approach. And what did we say? You want to speak on the NCSL best practices?
So part of our audit, what we came across is best practices from NCSL, and it was saying that how even other legislatures take into account as part of their budget process of examining the exemptions as part, so not only taking into consideration what are estimated revenues, but also what are we expending through tax exemptions, abatements, and credits. So as part of that, we urge the legislature to also look at adopt those best practices.
Thank you, Senator Brooks. That's a loaded issue you've got. But I want to give the Department of Revenue and Tax the opportunity, because after reading 2013's report, and you're going back to 2008, and it's now 2017, I mean, we're moving fast. And we just need to hear what is the department doing, because I know last year, the speaker here fought real hard to get 1.4 to Department of Revenue and Tax to increase your staff. And we were supported by everybody in the legislature, but we want to know where are we going, because it's no different. What Senator Snickers brought up is that it's ready after 90 days, the tax stamp. I'm concerned about everything else, because I know that most of the folks that are here want to defend their tax exemption. But when I met with with Frank Shimzu last week, we were only looking at 76, 80 wholesalers, and Senator Brooks already identified there's over 600. There's a lot more. And I don't know if we need to have that many. I understand that the reason why they have that budget exemption was to help the economy start. I mean, how much more do we need to keep the economy going? If you got the money to come to Guam, you got the money to pay the taxes. And if the department is behind on the system, we need to know what is the department going to do to catch up. Because until we get a good record, a good holding of what's out there, the OPA is probably never get a good audit. I mean, just reading our audit report, 33% is what you're looking at. It'd be different if you said 70%. It'd be more positive. But maybe the department can please explain what's going on. You first.
Yeah, I appreciate the public auditor's comments on the audit, but for many years, this is not the single time that we're entertaining the exemptions. I believe there's probably 3-4 times that we went through these exemptions, and we stayed up even midnight looking at the banking, looking at the wholesale exemptions that were proposed back then. Just want to know that we keep data in our system, and our data for somehow, in some years they're there, some years they are not there. But the last few years are very, to me, they're good data. The 14, 15, and 16 for 12, 13, I believe, because of the transitional things that we did. But as far as data that we have, we've been producing this data for anybody that wishes to look at it. I mean, every year we meet with the bond borrowers. We presented the gross receipts. We gave them, and these are the data that are reliable. And every year, basically, we do audits on all these exemptions. We look at them. There's a team of us that actually look at all these exemptions. And we do a lot of audits on the exemptions, by the way. So, there's some things that happened maybe on 2012 and 13 again, and maybe that's the reason why the public auditor is saying that we don't have those data for us. But as far as the credibility of those data, when I look at those data, even though they're not matching, but if you look at the audited reports that we have and the reporting that everybody submits, it's very close. And that's the one thing that I normally would look, reporting and what's audited every year. And, and the other thing that I've been working with the legislature for many years is to make it have the gross receipt returns filed online, because that would basically, human errors can happen when you process thousands of returns every month. So make it a mandatory thing. I think we had 3, 4 bills in the last 4 years, trying to convince the legislature to make it mandatory for businesses to file it online. It's so simple. I mean, data is there when you go in there and plug those numbers, and then you can pay it, online if it's available, if the taxpayer wishes to, or pay it at traditional Guam. So those are the things that we're trying to do to make it more, efficient. You can imagine 1/3 of the people are already filing online. In other words, we just need to get the 2/3 basically to file, online and get the data in as fast as possible. So, we're here basically to answer any questions. We produce this data on a yearly basis. Whenever anybody that asks for this data, we can give it to them, especially the legislature. But we do produce this data every year, and basically we have data here for 14, 15, and 16 on exemptions, and the public auditor looked at it. Yes, of course, the wholesaler is the biggest one. I just verified with our business license, there's about 890 wholesaler license that was issued for this last fiscal year. And the reason why it's so big, because one taxpayer can own multiple wholesale licenses. So those are things that we're looking at. So, it's the resources that we need, and a lot of the things that come up. But all these audits that are being presented by the OIG, we looked at it. I mean, especially when you talk about that we lost about $21 million on the last audit. Basically, we did the triennial for the real property in 2014. So we accomplished that goal that the OIG audit, especially that we're losing a lot of money on real property taxes. For the last 3 fiscal years, I requested that we get money funded to do the revaluation for the real property. Again, we never got that money, but in order to get more money into the government, we need to do the study, and we need to do the revaluation. So those are the things that we want to do, to basically get more money into the government. So, and basically we're talking about GRT here. So if there's any questions on GRT exemptions, we're here and we're glad to answer them.
Any of my colleagues want to ask a question now? Speaker?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the public auditor for finally completing the request that I made in 2013. But when I made the request in 2013, it was because through a FOIA, I was informed that there were over 600 wholesalers, and today it's almost 900, 890, you're saying. I'm not sure if the wholesalers here in the room, there's surely not 890 people in here, but the major ones are in here. And I think today's hearing is to try to figure out how it is that we can get rev and tax to give the legislature in a timely fashion and all the information that we need so that we can be making informed decisions about how we go about moving forward. I think the criticism that was in the report from the OPA was that the legislature was not being informed that we were losing or we were waiving almost $70 million a year in taxes. And had we known that earlier, would we have done something? And so I think that's what we need to try to address today. And I know everybody's here trying to deal with 230, but really that bill is not up for hearing today. That has not been referred. This is an oversight of revenue and taxation to try to figure out why we can't get reliable data on how much is being lost on an annual basis so that we can then make some decision. How many more people we have to give you, we put in an additional 1.4, as the chair said, into your budget to try to hire more people. But I'm just saying, what else do we need to do? 10 years ago, I was trying to get you an attorney. And you guys, I'm not sure. It was every year when you guys tell me you need something, we try to address it. And I think that's what we need to address today. what is it that needs to be done at Rev and Tax to get this data together? Because the one thing that I could not understand was why DOA and DRT cannot speak to each other on the same computers. It just doesn't make any sense to me. They're collecting the money that goes into your coffers, but they're not able to find out anything about what else is going on. And so we've got to discuss those really systemic problems within the department to try to address this issue. The exemption, according to the newspaper, was when Frank Santos was here. That was almost 20 years ago. So how many millions every year have we lost? We know in the last 3 years it was 70 a year, but how many over the last 17 years? You know, and for each of the other exemptions, how much are we losing or foregoing in each one of those? And is there a reason to continue them? That's, I think, what the auditor was trying to point out in her report, was that this is what we're losing, right, and you need to make a decision as policymakers whether or not, as she puts it, they've been fulfilling, these exemptions have fulfilled their intended purposes, and whether or not we should continue, or whether it should sunset or be revived. But it's just that we need to know, and it took, I asked 5 years ago for this. We finally got it today. It should be coming out from you guys on an annual basis. Yes. There just has to be some better way of you guys collecting data and providing it to us, so that I don't want any names.
Right.
And I just want to know the number, the quantity, the number of wholesalers, not how much each one of them is waiving, the number. And to go from 630 5 years ago to 890 today.
Yes, and we did respond.
And why?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will provide that report. We can get that data out, but when we go all the way back, and that's why our records for 11, 12, and 13 is not as reliable as moving forward, because we had that POS that went down, a whole huge issue with the procurement, I believe. So the system went down. We had to recreate another one, which is now called TPS. And then at the time that we brought it up, and it's not because it's antiquated system, the system works. It's updating what we require. Now, do we have money for that? Sometimes that's the issue, is money, anything with computer. And we want the same thing everybody wants, accurate data. That's our job, to provide accurate data. And that's why in the past we've asked for mandatory e-filing, and thank you for the staff that we are going to get. We haven't gotten them in-house, but they're still training. Then there's still the computers. Everything is computer nowadays. If you want data, if you want to, to protect the integrity of the data, it's computers, and how to make it work for us. We need money for system upgrades. The personnel that we're hiring, hopefully we'll come up with, we're working on all those personnel coming in, and that's great. That's absolutely going in the right direction. However, like when Senator San Nicolas asked about the tax stamp, we can't do it. Again, there's these unfunded mandates and it's the same people we're asking to do it, do the regulations, prepare the regulations, rules and regs. It's the same 4 people, a business license, who's handling that. So maybe in the future when you introduce laws, maybe do the rules and regs, prepare the rules and regs, and let us run with it. Our job is the tax administration, and that really puts more work on their shoulders when they try to produce all of these. So that's why it's not ready. They're doing the research. On top of that, we had the new law that just passed with the business license, that it's now monthly, so we're still rolling with that. So every day there's issues. So we're trying to do as much as we can and as best as we can. And we appreciate all the help that you've provided in the past. And as far as the reports, yes, we will make that available. The data is there. It's just the recording. All we have to do is call the programmers. How do you pull out that data? Like in the past, there was a line for exemptions, but moving forward, there's now a Schedule E that's specifically for the exemptions, and that's why they're easier to maintain and identify. So we're trying to work with our system and to move that forward, and we'll gladly provide reports in the future.
Any other colleague? I'd like to also recognize Senator James Paudon has joined us. Senator Stevens?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple questions for revenue and taxation. I know this is not an oversight, this is a roundtable, but you alluded to a couple of points like things you can do to increase efficiency, like requiring online filing. But are you aware that within those systems right now, you have not in existence standard operating procedures for how they operate? So, I mean, what I'm alluding to is if you're getting to a point where you're going to require the taxpayer to use a certain system, do you feel the importance that there's a need to have operating procedures on how they manage it? Because as of right now, DRT is not in compliance with the law to have those systems posted online. And in my own personal experience, I can tell you, unless I'm being lied to, that those systems don't exist in business license, GRT, and income tax. And then were you also aware that the system, those three systems and those three divisions don't communicate with each other?
I mean, first thing, the online GRT has been around for over 10 years.
Yes.
And we encourage, and we work with our IT people for security purposes and all these things. I think that's one of the main concerns is the security on the information that's been filed online. I think that's something that's been questioned, but we've been working with our IT people to address those things. But looking at the data that we have for the online people that file online, it's reliable. In other words, we have it, it's there. It's just a matter of maybe tweaking it and getting the IT people to ensure the taxpayers of Guam that it's safe to go online. And maybe that's one of the things that we're working, and we're working with our IT people.
It's not the safety. What I'm trying to get at is there's a call and a constant call for more funding, as if funding is always just the root of it's the solution to everything. Mm-hmm. But what I'm trying to get at is, have we looked internally at all of the efficiencies in terms of could we shorten personnel, or are we only looking at we're needing more people? I'll give you a personal example. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I'll give you a personal example of what I went through a little while back with my personal experience. So I started a business, small business, register as a sole proprietor, use my social security number. When I decide to hire employees, I get an employer ID number. I take that over to Rev and Tax, over to GRT. I update in the system. I then go try to pay my GRT under my EIN, and now all of a sudden I have no tax information. I'm not in the system. I'm not able to pay. I have to go back down to Rev and Tax. They don't know what's going on. It's about a month-long process, and then I have to go revert back to my social security number instead of my EIN. And then come to find out later that, I have to actually, now I have to go to business license and I have to update my EIN with them. So just as a regular taxpayer and personal experience, had I known that information, it probably would have cut down on manpower, because if I'm going through these types of experience, other customers are going through this type of experience. So cutting down on manpower to try to resolve those situations, ensuring that taxes get into the coffers a lot faster, could easily be fixed by just having procedures where the left is coordinated with the right. And if you go to one department, your information is not available. So what I'm talking about is when you look at the grand scheme of GRT, are we looking at synchronization and a symbiotic relationship between all of the divisions to make your jobs easier, so we can better identify where you actually need the funding? Because everybody can use more funding, but my issue is, have we actually looked at efficiencies in the department or in any department?
You're talking about, I guess, the different departments that plays role in getting a business license and getting. I don't think we share that data with every other department, the tax data, every other department out there. But as far as procedural wise, we do have the procedures for every section of our department, and I'm sorry that you went through that process, but you know, in order to start the business license, you get a license, and you have to clear with some people with, depending on the license that you have, you probably have to clear with Public Works or Land Management or the other
I understand
things.
the process. Yes. I wasn't trying to get into the nitty-gritty of that.
But we don't share the information.
I understand. What I'm trying to get to is, with little things like that, it's very indicative of a larger issue, right? When everybody is not on the same page, those are telltale signs of inefficiency in any organization, when the people at the lowest rung. So again, I ask because as of right now, mandated by public law, those operating procedures and how you deal with customers and your processes, as long as it's not a security issue or a terrorist issue, are supposed to be available for the public to review. And so what we've, in my experience so far, we go back and forth. We talk big picture. But what I'm thinking the failures are happening is we're not looking at the little picture. Because if we can't look at the little details in the minutia, how can we properly fund the necessity of DRT to go out there and accurately execute current mandates? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Davis. Senator Nicholas, you had a question you wanted to ask?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the dialogue. You know, one of the challenges we have when it comes to evaluating our circumstances here on this island is the availability of information and the full picture. For example, when we talk about compact impact, we always bring up the amounts that were owed, but one of the counter arguments that we regularly get from the federal government is, what was the contribution of the migrants to the island? And I think that the same lens needs to be applied when we're talking about subjects like this, for example, the exemptions that the auditor brought up. Because when we talk about how much GovGuam, quote unquote, loses in these exemptions, we also need to factor in how much these exemptions have helped to grow the economy and how much these exemptions have helped to keep the cost of living down. And then from there, we're able to get a complete picture on how any future policy decisions with respect to these exemptions are going to affect the community. We don't have that kind of picture. And so I guess I wanted to pose a question, perhaps to DRT, but perhaps more so to our auditor. How can we get that kind of a picture? What's your recommendation for us to be able to implement here on this island a vetting process where we don't just look at one small part of the pie, we actually look at the whole, you know, all the moving parts? Because, you know, removing these exemptions, I'm of the opinion that the impact of the cost of living, the negative impact that it will have on our wholesalers to be able to compete to off-island distributors, the impact it will have on the banking and insurance industry, and then the subsequent costs that will pass through to businesses and to individuals. Those will all have negative economic impacts. And so where we try to recover 70 million on the front end, how much are we going to actually lose on the back end? How do we get that full picture as opposed to just the front end picture?
Senator, you posed a very good question. Like in one of our audits, when we did on the qualifying certificates, we tried to quantify or tried to see, for example, okay, did they bring in the employment that they were supposed to do? And we're not economists in that area. The good news is we do have gross domestic product, you know, and we've seen that number is growing. And in fact, that was one of the questions we raised in our audit. You know, we've seen that GDP has been on the rise, yet the gross receipts tax went a V. And we, you know, 400 in 1 year in FY 2015, gross sales dropped by $400 million. Nobody at DRT had an answer, you know, hey, this is inconsistent with GDP data. How come? You know, why did gross receipts, you know, before even paying taxes, I'm just talking gross, you know, filings, how come it dropped by over $400 million? Nobody had that answer. And I don't even know where to begin to answer that question. You know, what is the employment? Has the employment increased over the years? It's a very good question, and that's where this holistic approach comes into play. As look at, you know, should we continue exemptions for wholesalers because employment in the wholesale industry has increased by X? You know, or whatever that data is. You know, I see the health insurance companies here, and I see the banking people here. How much has the banking industry contributed as opposed to the foregone revenue? And by the way, I have no idea what the foregone revenue is on banking. We didn't do that. Okay, I don't even know. But again, those are very valid numbers, you know, that should happen. I don't know who should do it. But the good news is at least we do have some GDP data, and all of that needs to continue to be refined and gathered so that, you know, like I saw Speaker Cruz's letter to DRT. How many taxpayers do we have filing, you know, at different levels? 10,000 and below, 20,000 below, 30,000, and so I remember 20 years ago, seeing a report that had that kind of economic data. The economic data that could be farmed from DRT is a gold mine, if we could ever capture it. You know, just knowing where our taxpayers are, what is our average income, you know, what is the high end, the low end, all of that. DRT has a wealth of data, but the problem is capturing it. Even customs and quarantine. We tried to do an audit on customs and quarantine, trying to figure out the amount of cigarette taxes coming in, because we were told that cigarette taxes coming in, unless it goes to a bonded warehouse, you have to pay the tax. So we were trying to quantify holistically how much cigarettes came in to kind of just do a global number. We brought in this amount of the last 2 or 3 years. The amount of taxes is, you know, should be around this amount. How much did we collect? You know, there is, you know, we are in a technological age. GovGuam is a billion-dollar enterprise. We need to start investing in technology. Senator Lee, Senator Esteves, Senator Castro, I met with all of you saying one of the weakest portions we have, I mean, the two most valuable departments are Department of Administration and Department of Revenue and Taxation. And it is really very sad that the two of them don't even talk. The right hand and the left hand might as well be on Mars, the way it is. And the data that is there is purely cash data. It is nothing coming out from revenue and taxation because it's purely cash data. Why? Because we got the cash. We don't know how much is owed to us in collections. Again, where I said at the start, we have an antiquated system. We rely too heavily on a manual process. We are not investing in technology that is needed to gather the kind of information you want and is needed for a $5 billion GDP government island that the island of Guam is.
I raised the question because, especially with the recent changes to the tax code that we're all going to be dealing with, and you know, I'm hearing about all these meetings that are happening and the potential revenue that might be lost, and of course the government's going to have to figure out how to adjust, you know, with respect to that. But we need to understand how that adjustment is going to, you know, how that's going to ripple out into the greater economy. And I mean, for proposals like this to just all of a sudden remove an exemption that I think is critical to the economy to allow it to continue to keep growing, that's just one example of how we're going to get a lot of these things coming across everybody's desks. And as the situation becomes more dire and as the government's financial situation gets more desperate, I'm worried that we're going to take one of these knee-jerk reactions and then just create an even bigger problem over the long term. So I understand, you know, we need to invest in technology and all that kind of stuff, but for me, I think that we need to we need to come up with a better process. I mean, the way we budget and how we consider these proposals, it needs to include a process that's going to also have us look at the impact of the policy, big picture, not just, you know, the one column in the spreadsheet is going to bring in X. So, Mr. Chairman, I would advise perhaps a different kind of roundtable in the future that would include not only our auditor and our agencies that are responsible for collecting and accounting for the monies, but we need to bring in the Bureau of Stats and Plans, the Office of Technology, GITA, and all of these other different agencies that should contribute to the conversation of how we're going to create a process by which we're going to be evaluating these policies. And I think it needs to happen concurrently with these discussions that we're having on the tax cuts that we're going to have to adjust to, because as we make those adjustments, we also need to be doing it with all of the information on the table, not just a limited amount of information. So I would like to make that be my contribution for today, Mr. Chairman, and perhaps our colleagues can also sit down and figure out how we're going to create this new group to have this big picture discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sinklis. For the folks that he identified, I think they're all pretty much members of the Tax Commission that's coming up next month. I know the OPA will be there and DRT is going to be there, so pretty much everybody's there. But I'm more concerned about what Senator Brooks brought up. What is the department going to do about it? Because I know that most of the folks that are here in the audience, they're actually here to defend their exemption. Very clear. And I want to be able to give them an opportunity to speak so that if there's any bill that's in the air, waiting to be assigned, the testimony you bring today will be sent to that committee, whoever gets it, that bill. So that it's very clear. Everybody here is opposed to anybody touching the tax exemption issue. I'm not in support of taking away an exemption. You know, I want business to stay in business so that we can keep the economy moving. But I'm worried about that regardless if the economy is moving, if we don't know what the true numbers are, then we don't know. And every time the auditor comes up with so much lost in a year for non-collecting, and you know, there's an Office of Technology that's coming up. That's neither here nor there. If they haven't done anything to help you folks, I think the legislature may be sending money to DOA to help them, and they're not helping anybody but themselves. But I like to hear from the department what's going to happen in the coming months, because the tax reform is here. And if you're a gold mine, you need to share it with everybody else on the island so everybody knows what's going on. Mr. Camacho?
First thing before we get into that, you know, as far as offering or addressing all these issues that we're looking at right now as far as data is concerned, my recommendation is, is to try to make it mandatory for business to file online, get the numbers on time, readily on time. In other words, if you file your return on a monthly basis and the data is there, you can ask for that data anytime you want. It takes a while for us right now to actually process, those returns that are filed. Let's say, for example, it's filed today, you probably get 3-4 months before you actually process those data. So if that's one thing that I've been pushing for a long time. The other thing is provide funding so we can make it optional also for people to file their income tax online, like the states, e-filing. I mean, 80-some% of people in the states file online. I know our numbers are not that high compared to the states. There are millions of taxpayers that file, but we have at least 70 to 80,000 people that are filing. Maybe 70,000 people are filing on Guam. If we can eliminate processing those returns and they're filed online, you can get it anytime you want. By line number, data that you want, whatever you want, it's in there, in other words. So that's something that we can offer to, if that funding can be provided, and we have this, maybe next year, we have these people the option to file their income tax return online, then you can get those data readily available at any time. In other words, those are the things that we've been, especially for the GRT. Why do we have to process 10,000 returns every month, for example? Some of them are zero tax, where they can file online and the data is there. Those are the things that we've been pushing, and we just needed to get it across and get that data in, and anything that we have, we can share. In other words, as far as data. I know you're concerned about income tax data. I mean, if we have those things filed online, like the IRS, there's no problem getting that data to you guys if they're all filed online, and get it to you. Every single line will be there. So those are things that I offer. As far as for the tax cut, we're still looking at it. Basically, I know in the past we had some estimation as to how much the individuals and corporates are going to. The corporate is kind of more straightforward because it's a one fixed rate, and it's for life. It's for life. For the individual, it's I think it's for 8 years. But we're still working as far as the impact on how would it impact the FY18 budget, as far as the budget moving forward. So that we're trying to refine right now. So we just don't have that number right now. So, but we're working on it.
Okay. Well, Mr. Camacho, as you identify what you need, we met several times. I need that in writing, so we can draft it in a bill, and then we can present it to my colleagues. But I'm just concerned is that even if we were to introduce a bill today to fix you, what's going on with technology? This is not a yesterday's. It's not tomorrow's concern. We're trying to figure out why, for the past 7, 8, almost 10 years, nothing's changed. OTEX existed for how many years now, Senator Castro? Maybe 2, maybe 3 years, 6 years. There's a lot of things that the system is already there. I'm just trying to understand why DOA can't see what DRT has, and like the OP has brought up. I'm only concerned that the folks that are here today, they're doing what they need to do. They're filing, they're reporting, but nobody knows what's the data. And that's where Senator Speaker Cruz has brought up, is the appropriations. When we're trying to figure out the budget, we actually don't even know we should trust what's being presented to us when we can't even see it ourselves. And if the OPA is going to report something different, then we're caught with, wait a minute, and then my colleagues here have to sit down, we have to come up with a conservative budget. And sometimes it's the better budget than what was presented to us. So if you could probably explain exactly, because the OPA has been saying this antiquated system, it's got to change. And I know for a fact, remember we discussed in tax commission, you've got the previous year, you don't have 2017, but you have 16, 15, 14. That you should be able to kick out. The gold mine is there, and that's what we want to know. Yes. Is DMR's there? What's the other group that's with OTEC? There's a bunch of groups, and I'm just trying to understand why. It's almost like the real IDIAC. You get a vendor, but you don't merge the data, and it doesn't make sense. Why even get that vendor? I'm just trying to make sure we all understand where we're coming from. Other than that, I want to make sure that if does any of my colleagues want to ask any questions? If not, we'll proceed with Senator Tom. Sir.
Mr. Camacho, you seem to emphasize the fact that significant improvements can be achieved if taxpayers would file online. And apparently, I personally know of some people who prefer to walk that document up to Revenue Tax because they want to see that timestamp on their copy of the document. But has Revenue Tax actually done some kind of a survey to find out just what is the reservations that taxpayers have, that they'll prefer to do the walking up personally than doing it online?
It's the retrieval. Retrieval of the data. In other words, once you file online, there's concern that afterwards the data cannot be retrieved. Once it's filed electronically, there's been concern that filing electronically, then when a person gets audited, hey, I filed, and I said, no, we have no record of that filing electronically, and that has been the concern. It's the retrieval of that online tax filing.
Okay, or change, because like, you know, some people don't like change and they want that copy in front of them, but as far as the retrieval, we haven't had an issue with our online created systems, and yes, it's a green machine or whatever it's called, but really all the data is in there. It's just a matter of us retrieving it. It's in there. And then what happened, and we keep going back to what happened in the past. When we came on board, the administration, there was a procurement issue with a vendor, so they had to, it was called a POS, and that was working perfect because that's what Office of Insular, that audit, OIG, so we tried to fix it. So they fixed it, and they had a POS. That worked, and then we had a procurement issue. We didn't renew the contract, so they had to terminate because we weren't paying it. So now here we are today with TPS. We're still trying to fix it, but it'll get fixed. And one of the things on the table is making them talk. And it's not any fault of the vendor. It was because of what happened. It was a DOA, a DRT issue. You cut off DOA, you cut us off too, so let's have two separate systems. Now we're saying, well, that's not working, so we need to be together again. So that's where we're at right now. We're fixing that problem.
I think if you go back to his question about, and the Senator Brooks's response about retrieval, it goes back to Senator Esteves' point. Unless and until you have the standard operating procedure on how these things are supposed to be done, and I don't know why, and you've admitted it several times today, your divisions within your department can't talk to each other.
No. Not necessarily.
I'm just saying, there have been times when I've gone up and I filed at business and I've had to, they say, you didn't file your gross receipts. I have to go find my paper copy to come up to prove to you because BPT hasn't seen that it hasn't been filed. And I go, why hasn't it been filed? I don't know. I said, but look at the date. It was 7 months ago. That's where the problem is, and that's why nobody wants to trust you to do anything online, because unless we have the paper to prove it, we're dead.
Was the one that you couldn't retrieve, was that online?
Was that online that was filed, or?
Was in person.
Paper.
Right.
And so one division wasn't able to get it to the next division so that I could clear to get my license.
And that's one of the things that we really want to encourage, the online filing, because I haven't heard any major complaints on online filers. I mean, I myself file online, and I've been filing it for years, and you know, my data is all in there. I mean, it gives me every single return that I file. The data is there. I mean, it's something that we track.
So,
I know I know what you're talking about. You know, the branches that are not communicating, but you know.
There are details. Oh, sorry.
but hold on, Senator Steph. I think you just need to fix the department's problem, because they really identified they're not talking to each other. And I know that because I was there. There are some occasions, if it's not online, of course, they're not going to talk to each other because they're not transmitting the same data. If you bring in a hard copy, they don't transmit it next door. But just, Senator Lee, you had a question you wanted to bring up?
I just wanted to, oh, sorry, I was just going to.
We'll Senator Lee first before we get there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to be able to get on with this roundtable hearing and hear from some of the stakeholders that are present, Mr. Chair, but the public auditor has mentioned, and we're talking about outdated systems, and I recall in a previous public hearing that we brought this up, and the director of DOA had informed us when we specifically asked about AS400 and the idea of getting a better system, a more up-to-date, efficient system. And she had mentioned that there were potential federal funds that were available through the Department of Interior. So I wanted to ask you for an update on that and when we're able to access those funds so we can look into getting a new system.
That's DOA.
You were also present at this, and the director of DOA said that DRT, DOA, I think the Office of Technology, that you were in communication with folks from DOI and that you'd have an update within a few months, and that was months ago. So I'm asking
yes,
for an update
I'm
now.
aware of that, Senator.
Okay, thank
but
you.
I just don't have the update information right now. And DOA is the lead in that particular grant or funding. But just going back to the you know, the coordination between DRT and DOA, the Office of Technology did a study on all the transactions that are happening between DRT and DOA, and have some recommendations to be made. So I think we're in that process of doing that. It's just it's ongoing, and I think the Office of Technology spent a few months looking at how transactions were handled. I think I just have to say that there are some duplicate works that is happening right now, and we're trying to eliminate those things.
All right, Mr.
Why do
Camacho.
things, you know, and those are things that we're doing right now.
Okay, and I just want to thank you in advance for getting back to the committee on an update on that DOI grant funding that we could potentially use to look at a new system that would help us to move away from AS400 into something more efficient that would allow all of the agencies, including the departments under DRT, to be able to communicate better so we won't have this issue going forward. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Davis.
Thank you. You know, I normally don't want to beat on a dead horse, but in this instance I will, because I just want the record to be clear, and so we're all understanding. Just to what the speaker was saying, it's not accurate. I think you need to have a good understanding of what your system does and how it operates as it stands before requiring online filing. And I don't want to touch into this too much, but again, from personal experience, in the transference from my social security number to my EIN, I lost all of my online filings under my social security number. It disappeared. The only way to switch the EIN was to completely delete my account and recreate it. So that's not effective data gathering. And going back to standard operating procedures, rule number 1 about technology, it needs to work for you. So if I were to ask, and you know, I'm asking this question, if I were to take the time to go down to Rev and Tax and ask for your plan to move forward with technology, your strategic plan on what the system needs to do for you and how that strategic plan marries up with Department of Administration, would you be able to provide that? For example, we want this system needs to provide this data, needs to talk to this division, this agency, and this agency. And if I put that up against DOA's, are they gonna work together? And if we don't even have that level of synchronization, you know, forgive me for saying, just don't bother coming to ask, at least while I'm here, don't bother to come asking for funding, because that's the type of level of strategic planning and management we need, so we're not running into the same issues we've had historically where we're paying for these lofty systems that don't even do what we need them to do. So I just want to highlight that point, that Office of Technology is great, but if you're not sitting at the table with every single other agency that you have to deal with to come up with a consolidated strategic plan, then we're already failing. So thank you.
Senator Terlai.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to go back again to the audit. And so the letter from the auditor where she summarizes what the audit found is very specific as to what the issues are. And some of these are like policymakers, we should measure the social and economic goals and determine the effectiveness. So those are things I think that we can talk about at another time. But going back to the data so that we can actually do that, when I go down this list, about 7 items, plus the one that the auditor said today is that we can't tell who is getting the exemptions. Anyway, so there were some gaps in data from prior years, right? But it looks like the recent data is actually available. At least it can tell us regarding GRT, and I think what you're saying, Mr. Director, is that we pretty much can get any GRT data that we want or need if it's been filed online. That's correct? We can pull that data out, yes.
And also process. And if the return is processed,
all right, but it looks like in order to complete this audit that the data from even the manual filed GRT forms from maybe 2014 to 2016 have already been inputted somewhere that she was able to access. So because we've got totals of exemptions per category, and so we know all the categories. We might not know who the specific vendor was or the wholesaler, according to the auditor, but we've got for sure the categories, right? And I'm sure if they file online, you could break that data down by vendor if you wanted to, right?
Oh yes, whatever we enter, we can see all those data.
Okay.
For example, the GRT, there's so many different activities.
Yes.
We can run for every activity.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking because I use the online filing also for the GRT, so that makes sense to me. That data should be all available, and our questions regarding GRT data in particular. And it looks like the concerns are mostly regarding old, unreliable years, I think, that we have. Okay, so, but moving forward, I guess I just want to make sure then that that the only thing I can see here that maybe that's data that we don't have then going forward would be, well, this one is a reconciliation between DRT and DOA, but you're working on that. And then the next one is DRT should do more analysis regarding system errors and significant gross receipts fluctuations. Okay, so that's analysis. And then it says best practices by NCSL requires that policy makers be able to review tax expenditure reports. Are those available? Which include exemptions, deductions, credits, exclusions, or other deviations from the normal tax structure. Isn't that available? Isn't that information all available?
Yes, yes. In other words, what data we can give data on everything that we enter, the gross receipts, the
exemptions, deductions,
taxable amount, and
the credits.
And credits.
All right. All right. Okay, and then I'm not sure what I would do with this information about who exactly got the exemption, and
well,
maybe if the auditor could clarify why that data, which is not listed in the audit report, is necessary. The things that you did list as to being necessary and that policymakers should review, I think this data sounds like it may be actually available from gross receipts information, right? Especially after it's all entered. It may be slow for the manual filers, but you've got it, right? And you could, right. It's entered, that's your system, you enter it all into the computer, so eventually it's all available.
Those data that on the gross receipts that are showing on the form, they're all available. In other words,
right,
everything that we enter into that our AS400 will be available. In other words.
All right, and the auditor, you said one of the first things you said was that we can't tell who got the exemptions, but you've listed the categories, so we can tell the. Why do we need to know? Well, what are you?
We were able to categorize all of the exemptions except for $11.5 million.
Okay.
That's the one that's listed on page 31 as unknown.
Right. Okay, so the unknown.
That's the amount of the unknown. And then also there were issues regarding when a taxpayer files an amended return. We found it would delete the prior information. It didn't show amended, and there were some systemic issues that we discussed with them that they needed to fix.
All right. And even the 11 million that's not showing, that can be fixed?
Well,
going forward? I mean, those are like the deviations, right?
Yes.
That you're calling. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you able now?
We're looking into those things right now.
What do you mean by looking into?
I mean, when you talk about gross receipt tax of $280 million every year, and you're looking at an exemption of 11 million, which produces so how many 4% of 11 million is how much?
What should happen, what we said when we met with John is, the exemption needs to go to which code? But, there was a coding error, okay?
That's what I was hoping, that it's something that's
that's
easily...
what- It superseded whatever had happened and went into, pardon the expression, the suspense file.
Okay, okay.
Every agency, every...
These are like anomalies that shouldn't
Yes.
happen, but hopefully the system, yeah, you're going forward, able to correct this quickly, and
Yes.
the reports are giving us data that we need.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I guess what we're saying here is that when people file, there's 40-some exemptions, so exemptions as a quote. So sometimes some taxpayers don't even put a quote in it, so they won't be able to know what those
errors.
exemptions
Okay.
are.
So the good part is that we've got data that we actually can then move towards the analysis that many of my colleagues have talked about. This analysis part, we're looking to DRT to do some analysis, DOA, and of course policymakers and the auditor, they would like to do her own analysis, I'm sure, but and maybe of course the public would like to do its own analysis. So I guess that's next. Is just how do we get this data available to everybody quickly?
Sure.
You notice I'm looking left and right to see if anybody wants. Otherwise, why don't we go ahead and we're going to start with some of the folks that are tax exempt and allow them to speak. And Mr. Frank Shimizu has a PowerPoint. Tommy, you've got that ready for? Okay, and we have Mr. Shimizu speak in reference to the wholesalers. I guess his part, and it'll pretty much be almost the same for all the wholesalers, I would assume. May not to a certain degree, but generally should be the same. And then we'll proceed with Mr. Ken, and then we'll just go down the line, and then we'll end up with Mr. Phil Flores, because he can easily move his chair up, so that wouldn't be so hard. But Mr. Shimizu, if you could please.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. We need to get the, there it is. My dogman was telling me for a while that it's starting to get tired sitting in one place. Thank you for the opportunity. Boy, I have a small dogman. Anyway, let's take a look at the state of the industry, okay? Next slide, please. In 1984, Senator Frank Santos, of course, most of the old-timers know that Senator Frank Zipper Santos enacted a bill that says no more double taxation for the same goods. No more. 1984, we will only tax that good, that merchandise, that SKU, once and one only, at retail, the GRT. Double taxation essentially ended. Thank you, Senator, the late Senator Frank Santos. After 1984, GRT sales was against the wholesalers was eliminated, retail sales only. There were 6 distributors prior to 1984 with 640 employees. Next slide, please. Now, let's take a look at the state of the industry, and I've put up here significant dates. 1984, GRT at retail and wholesale. Both the wholesalers and the retailers pay taxes, the same taxes for the same goods. 6 wholesalers, 640 employees. 2007, and I put up here 2007 because that's the time when there was another bill, a similar bill, saying we gotta tax the wholesaler for the same goods in addition to the retailer. So President Eloise Basa of the Chamber of Commerce came forward, and at that time there were 34 wholesalers with 1,690 employees. Now, these are not just figures that say we assume or we are told or we have read in the newspaper. These are actual figures, In 2016, I happened to, hey, where's that telephone directory? So I took out the phone book, and unfortunately, the phone book that was on my desk was 2016. But I opened it up and I counted 76 wholesalers. So then I asked my staff, get a hold of the Bureau, Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor statistics, figures, and get me some accurate numbers of employees. And lo and behold, there were 1,960 employees in 2016. Then another one of my staff said, Chief, we got the newer telephone directory, the 2017 directory. So I said, let's take a look at it. When we looked at the yellow pages under wholesalers, there were 87 wholesalers with telephone numbers. Now, we're not going to say, well, there were 900 wholesalers that took out a package for a license. No, these are actual numbers. Those 87 wholesalers, when we looked at the Bureau, Department of Labor statistics, they employed 2,320 employees. Again, guys, girls, these are facts. They're not made up numbers. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about some of the impacts that Guam distributors only face. And what about the off-island suppliers? Who are they? Anytime you increase the tax on anything, I don't care whether it's excise tax or what, you've done a favor to these off-island employees, off-island wholesalers. These are manufacturers. The Navy Exchange can buy directly from the manufacturer. They don't have to go through a wholesaler. Wholesalers are another off-island supplier. Brokers. Who are brokers? Brokers are somebody that rents a suite in San Leandro, San Pedro, in Walnut Creek, California. Just rent a suite, 3 employees, and they take orders from retailers here in Guam. Their overhead, 3 employees, a rental of an office space, and that's it. No warehouse, no delivery trucks, nothing. Distributors, a retailer here in Guam can also buy from another distributor from Japan, from Malaysia, from the Philippines, from Australia, New Zealand, United States, Hawaii. Ship channelers, what are ship channelers? There's many, many of them. Ship channelers are, again, offices with 3 or 4 employees, answer the telephone, a ship comes in from Mertz, from Hapag-Lloyd, from Matson, say, hey, we need some provisions. We need some meat from groceries, some canned goods, because we're going to supply the ship that's coming in to feed the crew. At the same time, they can receive a telephone call from Cost You Less, from Payless, from 7 Days Supermarket. Hey, I need a pallet of Spam. And they'll do it. They'll get on the telephone, go to the distributor, or wholesaler, or even the supplier, and say, deliver a pallet of Spam to so-and-so freight forwarders, triple B, and we will stuff it in a container and ship it to 7 Day Supermarket. Those are ship channelers. Distribution centers, the big boys, every big boy has one of these. Walmart has one. Kmart has one. United Airlines has one. And if a retailer has smart connections, he or she can go to these guys, compare prices with the local wholesaler. Oh, hey, they're $1 a dozen cheaper than Ambrose or Luan Fong, or, okay, let's buy from them. Last but not least, military retailers. Enough said for military. Now, it's okay to talk about problems, issues, challenges, But if you don't have any solutions, BJ, then no sense in my coming up here to talk. Do we have any solutions? The answer is yes. And if you folks enforce it, you will bring in millions and millions and millions of dollars without having to raise anything. Here are the solutions, some of the solutions. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? This is technology now, that's a problem. Okay, solution number one, scanning capable registers. Now, I wish I had some of my staff to explain what this very important issue is. Oh, here comes Tom. He's going to explain this solution that could bring in a lot of dollars.
So when we refer to that, it's comes back to like the cash register, right? How many of us go into our independent corner store, and how many times have we picked up whatever merchandise we're gonna get, and it doesn't do 2.99 plus 5.99. It's just bing, the cash register opens, take your money, you walk off. That's like there is a lot of leak. It's like GWA, right? They produce 100 gallons. I think at one time I read less than 50 gallons of revenue is captured. Well, that's the same thing. I don't, is it 50? About 50%.
That's more than 50.
More than 50.
58%.
Thank you. So, but it's, you know, I don't know what the percentage is, but every one of us has encountered the no GRT ringing up of merchandise. That's what we really mean, is that make sure all the retailers pay and track it. That is millions of dollars right there. I think one of the challenges is you need to fund revenue tax, have revenue officers that are supposed to go out and check and make sure that everything is being rung up, because we all know it's not happening. Everyone has seen it, everyone has experienced it. You just don't think about it. Well, we're saying you need to start thinking about it and start doing something about it.
Okay, we're not saying that those mom and pops or neighborhood stores must be closed. No, we're not saying that. Going forward, any newcomer that wants to open a retail shop or a wholesale or whatever must have scanning capable register. And then grandfather those other guys in, and you guys decide what's a reasonable time for them to upgrade from a manual, non-scanning, non-registering to a scanning capable register. Give them enough time. What, 2 years, 3 years? I don't know. You guys decide that.
I guess it speaks to, I think we were speaking with Senator San Agustin. He says, oh, when I was at Revenue Tax, if you don't give a receipt, there's supposed to be penalties or fines, but nobody's checking if receipts are being given, things are being rung up.
The second solution, moving on because time is kind of short. Second solution is ensure all imports are reported accurately.
And could I speak to that?
Yes,
that was what we were trying to do with Customs and Quarantine, trying to quantify all of the imports coming in, all the bills of lading. But what we were told by them, that system scanning capability would cost upwards of several $1 million to have that capability, but at least goes back to what we were trying to do for cigarette tax. At least just get that to quantify how much cigarette tax was imported versus how much tax was paid. You know,
all right.
So like what he's trying to say is how much was actually imported into Guam versus how much was actually reported in gross receipts.
So,
which is very much needed, and I agree definitely with him.
Thank
on
you.
that.
Thank you,
And if
Doris.
I could, May, on number 1, the scanning capable registers, there was a bill passed into law, and I believe it was Senator Barnes, called the Cash Economy Bill, okay, that was supposed to try to address some of this area, but unfortunately, like anything else, well-intended but lack of implementation on the part of the government.
thank you very much, Doris. How many times have we seen retailers out there, hey, this is a brand new brand of cigarettes from Asia. We go downtown, nobody knows about it. So what I'm saying is that get those importers that, for example, declare 20 cases of cigarettes when there's 200 cases in the backside of the container. All we're asking, penalize them, shut them down, because the other retailers who pay taxes, pay cigarette taxes, it's unfair to them. Solution number 3, I've seen this work up in Saipan. There is a revenue officer right there at the United States Post Office. And when a package comes in about this size, that size, they normally let go. But when somebody backs up a pickup truck or a flatbed with 10, well, I call them balikbayan boxes. You know, a balikbayan they're not necessarily from the Philippines, but they're big, they're huge. They back up their truck and load 10 of these and ride off into the sunset, and it ends up in their store later on. You guys, take a look into that, because there's millions of dollars in revenue just slipping away. Military baggage sales. What else can we say? I can say this. When we increase an excise tax or a GRT tax, the Navy Exchange is jumping up and down for joy. Because what you're doing is that there's a big gap already, which later on we'll see with Huggies and Famil and so forth, and you're just increasing that gap and losing revenue from J&Z, from Costules, from 7-Day Supermarket over to inside the fence. Go after individuals and companies that don't pay taxes. I mean, if you add all of these five things together and impose our will on them, because they're not doing the island a favor, you're gonna collect millions and millions of dollars. You might not need, or I'm just saying, you don't need a higher tax to fund Guam Memorial Hospital. You don't. Just do that. Again, scanning capable registers. We're not saying close all the mom and pops that don't have it. Grandfather them and give them a reasonable time to upgrade. You guys decide what time that is. 2 years, 5 years, forever, whatever. Okay, let's talk about expenses. Next slide. I have listed here cost drivers. Everything that you need to have to figure out a laid-in cost, a landed cost. These are expenses. And without going through every one of them, just take a quick look at it. In fact, item number 3, ocean freight, that's now separated into other 2 categories: ocean freight itself and a fuel surcharge. Inland freight at destination, port handling at the destination or the origin. If you're shipping less than a container load, there are extra charges for that. Taxes. Currently, the wholesalers don't pay any GRT, but excise taxes are there very, very high, a lot higher than 4%. They apply to tobacco and alcoholic beverages. Just as a historical thing, before 1984, Ambrose was never interested in importing consumer goods. Why? We cannot compete with the off-island distributors who pay no taxes. But after 1984, we're now distributing diapers, we're distributing baby formula, we're distributing air fresheners, we're distributing toilet paper. Why? We can't compete with those off-island buggers. On the next page, there are about a dozen more cost drivers. Some of these drivers, some of these expenses are not done annually, but it depends on your bottom line. These are called below-the-line expenses. For instance, I need 2 trucks. But if my bottom line is in the red, I don't buy those trucks. That's the way business operate. But I need 2 trucks because 2 of my trucks are 15 years old already. If I show a black figure on the bottom line, I go ahead and buy it. That's called below-the-line financing. Okay, next slides, please. We're almost there. We're almost to the end. Now, let me just talk briefly about how a price to the retailer is computed. It's very simplified. Later on, Tommy will show you a more detailed calculation. There's 3 assumptions. Let's say that the pallet of toilet paper or paper tissue costs $100. It costs more than that, but just for round figures, it costs $100. And let's say all of those cost drivers that I mentioned before, 24 of them, they all add up to $20. And let's say that the wholesaler markup, he needs this to survive because otherwise he won't be able to pay salary, employees, etc., etc. 20% markup. So you put down on a piece of paper $100 cost of goods, plus the $20 cost drivers, all of the handling, ocean freight, insurance, etc., etc. The total is $120. Then the wholesaler distributor adds his markup. So 120 times 20% will be $24. Then my price to my favorite retailer will be $144. But notice the footprint down below. Price to the retailer must be competitive. It has to. Why? Because if you're not competitive, the retailer would switch to another distributor in Guam. Or if your price is too high, the consumer will switch brands on you. Or worst of all, the retailer will start importing, bringing in the same products from an off-island source. It's as simple as that. You gotta be competitive. So this thing about these guys, the retailers and the wholesalers, are making a bundle of dollars. Okay, next, let's go to a more detailed analysis of how a landed cost or price to the retailer and a price to the consumer is computed.
So I just picked a few of our products that we distribute. If you look at the different columns, there's a military column. So for example, the first product we're going to look at is Enfamil infant formula. It's a 12.5 ounce can of powder, right? You add water to it. Right now on the base is $15.54 a can. Just take a look at that. That's the reality. That's what it is. So the next column where it says no GRT, my cost is $15.50 for that can. No GRT, so I sell it to the retailer for $19.23. 19% gross profit margin. That's lower than our targeted. I don't know what my other colleagues shoot for. But that's lower than our target. But the reason why it's below target is because the only way that the retailers here on Guam will buy the Enfamil from Ambrose is if we're competitive. If not, they'll buy from elsewhere. So if you add, and you take a look and you go all the way down, it says PTC is priced to the consumer. So that can of Enfamil costs mom $24.99. So there's a big gap between $24.99 and $15.54. I guarantee you, every one of us has access to the exchange. We can call your cousin, your uncle, and your auntie, can you get this for me? Or I'm having a fiesta, go get the steamboat. How many families of 3.2 people need an 80-pound piece of meat that you get at the commissary? But that's besides. Just look at that gap. There's a lot of people already probably getting stuff on base and buying locally, you know, if they run out and their cousin didn't go there yet. But if you look at the next column, if you add 4% GRT at the wholesale level, my price to the retailer has to move from $19.23 to $20. Because if you just do the math, if I maintain that 19%, you add the 80 cents cost, my new selling price ends up being $20 to the retailer. Well, he's not going to absorb that cost. He's going to pass it right on to mom, and her new cost is $26.08. But that, I guarantee you, is the minimum that the price will change. I don't know that anyone sells anything for $26.08. Most likely they get around to $26.25, $26. But really, what I'm saying is that if you put a layer of tax in there, you're going to drive the cost up to the consumer by over 4%, closer to 5%. That's the bottom line. You can look at the other two slides, very similar scenarios. And that's just the reality. I can do, if you do that tax layer, I can guarantee you that this scenario is going to happen. Because at my level, I can't afford to. In the wholesale business, if we net 1.5%, we are jumping for joy. You know, that below the line cost that he was talking about, we're going to get that. So I can't absorb 4%, so I must pass it on. And the retailers are going to do it as well. It'll just go right to the consumer. And I think someone was mentioning the same thing. What's the impact to the end user? And that's going to be one of them. Okay. I can just skip the next two slides. It's the same.
Yeah. So let's just go another slide. Okay. Sa among malalefa. Don't forget. Let me read this because this is very important. Because somebody mentioned that, hey, the can of Spam, despite the fact that in 1984 there's no GRT to the wholesaler, the can of Spam continues to increase over and over and over again. Why is that? Now, that's a valid question. I'm not criticizing the person who said that because it's very valid. But why is that? Why does that happen? Why doesn't prices ever go down? Okay, let me read this because it's very important. When a cost factor or a driver, remember there's 25 of them that we mentioned previously, such as fuel or ocean freight is reduced, or an item such as taxes are removed, the item's price, as in 1984 to the retailer, or price to the consumer, does not necessarily decrease by that amount. Why? Because there may be a dozen or more cost drivers that increase every year, such as cost of goods. Every year, the cost of Budweiser from the brewer increases. The cost of Huggies diapers increases every year. No exception. The cost of utilities also increase. The LEAC, L-E-A-C charge, just brace yourself because we're going to get one. The cost of oil have gone up. In fact, think last week, the price of gasoline went up 15 cents a gallon. Again, brace yourself because it's going to go up even higher. Insurance went up. Insurance for not only marine insurance, but my medical and dental provider that I give my employees, it has gone up tremendously. Handling, supplies, transportation, and others, they're all going up. So for every item that we try to remove from the laden cost because of a price reduction, man, there's about 6 to a dozen others that will go up. It's a fact of life. So if the fuel, the ocean freight, or the imposition of higher taxes were included in the mix, all it means is that the items priced to the consumer would have gone up a lot more. It's a fact of life. Sorry for that bad news, but if we increase the GRT, the prices of goods to the consumer will go up a lot more. Or we lose the business to an off-island retailer. So, talong biyahe, one more time, do the math. Before 1984, the tax for the same goods is applied twice. There were only 6 distributors. Ambrose was not in one of those. We're only a beer, liquor, and tobacco with 640 employees. After 1984, look at the numbers, and these are all numbers that we obtained from the Department of Labor, from the Chamber of Commerce, and from sources from the United States. So, guys, Jesus Masi, thank you very much.
Thank you,
I hope
Mr.
there's a lot of questions answered with this presentation, and more importantly, a lot of misconceptions about the industry, about businesses in general. A lot of misconceptions are laid to rest, hopefully.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Ms. Brooks?
Yeah. Going back, thank you very much, Mr. Jimazo, for that very enlightening presentation. And I understand the problem. As I was talked to by a number of the Rotary folks, the common comment that I hear is, why doesn't GovGuam switch to a sales tax? Okay, that, and I just kind of like wanted to kind of get your thoughts in that area, as opposed to GRT versus a sales tax, because right after my presentation at the Rotary, that comment came out. Why doesn't GovGuam switch to a sales tax? Because Oregon is the only state in the union that does not have a sales tax. 49 other states have sales tax, ranging from 4% in the state of Hawaii to over 10%, like in California and other places like that. So just kind of curious what your thoughts are in that area.
That's a fair question, and it's a modern way to do things. And just like Doris said, most of the states don't have GRT, sales tax. And bear in mind again, whatever tax structure you select, we've got off-island distributors waiting in the wings, and the military. Don't forget, the military is a business just like us, and I don't blame them for wanting a piece of that business, wanting a larger piece of that pie. Don't blame them. They're a business. They're not uniformed. They don't study military tactics. They're a business just like us.
That's also a military tactic in business. Senator Stevens, you wanted to ask a question before we move on to Mr. Langro?
I'd just like to add to that. You actually brought up a really good point with regards to a sales tax. I've done extensive research into this. If you look at different jurisdictions, you'd have something more akin to a business privilege tax or gross receipt tax for service-type businesses, while on the retail and consumer side, it'd be a sales tax because you're actually taxing the goods. Now, it has created a lot of issues that we use this same type of taxation for both types of businesses. Now, one of the issues that's been brought up is people don't want to have to pay on the GRT and have to pay on top of that a sales tax, but we could potentially look at legislation as completely dissecting the two into two different categories, because something that a lot of people are not aware of is there was a long legal battle with regards to within the Constitution and the Consumer Clause. And what they've allowed is allowed for states, Guam inclusive in that aspect, to collect on what's called a retaliatory tax. So if I purchase something online in California and California has a state tax, I'm paying their sales tax on that. But Guam, without a sales tax, is not able to claim on those taxes. So in most instances, especially states that are larger producers that have larger state taxes, most of them are about the 10% mark, even at 4% on the sales tax would not only encourage in part some people to purchase locally, but more importantly, with those retaliatory tax provisions, that 4%, regardless of which state, because it's our local tax, will always return to Guam for any online purchases anywhere. So I just wanted to add to that conversation, though it is a difficult matter because there are a lot of legal implications that we still haven't yet, I haven't yet to get an answer on Guam's consideration in some instances as a domestic location, and then other instances where we're treated as a foreign instance. So with regards to retaliatory tax and consumer taxes and how that regards to the Constitution and the plenary powers, if in some instances we're taxed as though we're domestic, to where if I'm buying a product in California, I'm paying 10% or I'm paying more. But in other instances, can the retaliatory tax apply to Guam, or are we just left to pay the retaliatory tax for other states, but we're not able to benefit from those same provisions that we're being forced to pay for? So just want to add to the record to that.
Okay. Keep it short.
To be sure, I just want to make mention of it, and we kind of touched on it. Number one, if you're going to implement a sales tax, you need to remove the GRT. You can't have both, because then it's back to double tax. But going back to, if I buy something online and ship it to Guam, if it comes through UPS, FedEx, any freight forwarder, if it's for personal consumption, I get assessed the 4% use tax. But there is probably triple, quadruple, I don't know the number, and probably that needs to be looked at, but if it comes through the United States Postal Service, if I'm smart enough to say I'm buying this, ship it to my United States Postal Service, and it's a $100 item, I am getting that for $100. The use tax is not applied, and that's what we see in the outer islands. Saipan has a guy, customs in the post office, and anything that comes in, your first is this for resale, for personal use, and they collect their taxes. And it kind of goes back to fund either customs or revenue tax. That's the cash register. That's the cash register. GPA did it. They went to the meters that are accurate. There's no more estimating the amount. I guess GWA did the same thing. The most important thing you need to fund is the cash register, a very modern one. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving along, Mr. Longuero.
One of the things that I encourage all of you senators to keep in mind, playing off Mr. Shimazu's number thing, is we have a very small population. We have 162,000 people living here. The majority of the people that live on this island work in low-paying minimum wage or low-paying service jobs because we have a fairly stagnant economy. So let's take a look at what those numbers translate to. I can't believe I lost my page. Okay. That right now we have a tax base of 70,000 people. Out of that 70,000 people, according to the statistics books, we have 44,662 households represented. Out of those 44,000 households, 60% of them make less than $40,000 a year. So when we look at any change in tax policy, we have to bear in mind that the majority of the people who live on this island and work on this island are just are not even in middle class status yet. So any massive change we make in tax policy is going to have adverse effects, asymmetrically adverse effects, on those people least able to make ends meet. It gets even worse when you look at it on a per capita basis. When you look at it on a per capita basis, only 13.4% of the people on Guam make more than $40,000 a year in their job. So when we look at that number right there, we need to keep in mind how the tail literally is going to wag the dog when you make any adjustments or changes in tax policy. Hindsight being 2020, 10, 15, 5, 3, 2 years ago, we should have delinked from the United States IRS code and preserved what we had at that time. Now you're going to be dealing with massive changes to the revenue side of the equation, to the downside. Massive changes to the unfunded mandate side, to the upside. Congratulations. Now you're going to have to figure out how to straddle that without breaking the backs of taxpayers. And here's why. There's been a lot of talk about this, how this reduction in taxes is going to stimulate growth, and we're going to make it all up in sales. As a retail consultant, I can't tell you how many businesses went broke saying that we're going to reduce prices and make it up in volume. That's not going to happen because according to the American Tax Policy Institute, a person making $40,000 a year is going to see his take-home pay go up by $31 a pay period. We're going to see his tax bill go down by $751. But in the meantime, government of Guam is going to lose the float that you guys have been depending on to make it from payroll to payroll to payroll. So we've known for years this was coming. We had the auditors' reports that have been showing that we basically, out of the last 7 years, had 7 deficits. The only positive year we had was when the government didn't spend all the money it borrowed. And yet, as policymakers, you haven't taken the time to systematically reduce operating costs for government of Guam in an organized, systematic fashion so that you'll be able to avoid the kind of chaos you're going to have to inflict on the government now just because of the tax situation alone. And I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but it isn't, because nowhere have I heard any policymaker talk about the budget cuts. The Trump administration has already forecasted somewhere between 30 and 35% budget cuts across the board, and maybe even higher budget cuts on entitlement programs like SNAP and Medicaid. Considering that 36% of the population on Guam is receiving either SNAP or Medicaid or both, those are going to put our families into a serious financial straits. Government of Guam doesn't have the resources to deal with that. Government of Guam doesn't have the resources to deal with the impact of laying off maybe 3,000 or 4,000 employees just to be able to live within its means. Because there hasn't been any aggressive business development, we don't have an economy that's going to be able to absorb 3,000 to 4,000 employees laid off. Now, I wish that was the worst of it, but it isn't. Because employees are caught between a rock and a hard place by policy makers steadfastly refusing to raise the quality of living through raising the minimum wage, the increases of increases in living are up about 30% with no corresponding increase in the cost of surviving, let's say. And as a result, we are seeing large numbers of our younger people leaving the island. So Guam is getting older. As our younger people leave, the balance of power, the balance of payment shifts to the older people who are in their retirement years, have less income that can be taxed to provide the demand increased services we seniors are requiring. So now that's another balancing act that you as policymakers need to deal with. You have a declining revenue base, you have a declining funding base, you have, if you do make this change and revoke the exemption on wholesalers, you're going to see, as it is now, before every fiesta and every weekend and every 3-day weekend, where I live, I see, it's almost like a parade of pickup trucks driving out of the main gate of Naval Station, filled to the top with beer, soda, and furniture, which dramatically impacts the ability of small businesses outside the gate to survive. Lifting any change you make in tax policy is going to have an adverse effect on that. The fact that we're not collecting millions of dollars in taxes on goods that are being bought over the internet is affecting it too, because as our quality of life goes down, as our purchasing power goes down, because if now that the fuel tax has gone through and there's proposals to raise the business tax, remove the exemption, add new taxes, raise new fees, without a corresponding increase in the minimum wage, because we know that 60% of Guam's workers are in low-wage positions, where's that money going to come from to pay for all these grandiose schemes? We want to buy a new computer system for DRT, and I'm all in favor of that, but I know that that's literally, we're looking at a $30, $40, $50 million hardware expense, triple that on the software expense, and double it for the installation and maintenance. Where's that money going to come from? Remember, 162,000 people and only 13% of the wage earners make more than $40,000 a year. So I urge you to keep that in mind, because I'm a perfect example of what's happening in this squeeze. I'm a senior citizen on a fixed income, and right now about 30 to 40% of my purchases are online. That is money that is not recycling through the economy as a result of the multiplier effect. I'm even now buying groceries online, and if the exemptions go up, then I will shift more and more of my purchasing online, which is going to have adverse consequences to the retailers and the 2,000 to 3,000 people they employ, because those people are in, unfortunately, the lower tier of the low-wage job structure of this island's economy. But if I can't afford to survive on my fixed income, I have got to make changes. And those people are going to have to make changes as well. So this is a very delicate balancing act. You can't balance a $105 million deficit. I can't wait to see where we end up for 2017. We can't balance that on the backs of the taxpayers alone. But by the same token, you can't make the kinds of radical changes you're talking about without doing a very, very delicate, intricate dance that should have been done 10 years ago, but now you're having to deal with the fallout of it now. So you've got lower revenue, you've got lower federal funding, you've got increased federal mandates, and you've got the best and brightest with the highest earning potential on our island leaving for better, greener pastures and better living conditions off island. And the majority of them are never coming back. When I was in this situation in 1978, I was gone for 28 years. So all the earning power, my prime earning power, was spent in Hawaii, California, Nevada, and Georgia. Now we're seeing a large number of people at the beginning of their careers when they're rapidly approaching their peak earning power, but they're doing it in Hawaii, California, Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia. So all I do is encourage you to follow the advice that served me well in my career. Make haste slowly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leonguero. Mr. Camacho, make sure you watch out for him, because we need to tax him. We're going online. Anyway, we'll move on to Mr. Tim. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaker, good senators. First thing I'd like to shout out is, I guess Frank has left, but I wanted to thank him for all those wonderful spam moments in his presentation. So, a couple of things. There's a big confusion about how many wholesalers there actually are. We're a $5 billion economy. Is 800 wholesalers too many? I'm not sure. But there's some other things that haven't come out in this discussion. A lot of retail operations have wholesale licenses, and I imagine that that has greatly proliferated the last 5 years. And one of the reasons is because of increases in tourism. And so these folks are able to sell wholesale to different types of tourist-related operations, and I think that's very legit. This one I'm not sure about, but I think maybe individuals who sell products like Herbalife, all these things, I think they're also getting individual wholesale licenses, and I think that that's another reason why we're seeing this proliferation. But my main concern, I have two main concerns. One is the consumer should only be taxed once. The second one is, please don't impose a tax system on us that favors off-island sources. Herbalife, companies like that can be a perfect example. Their products aren't taxed, as Frank so eloquently pointed out. So please, whatever you do, try to follow those two principles. A lot of my colleagues will disagree with me, but you guys are between a rock and a hard spot, and there's no question in my mind you're going to have to increase taxes. And I think there's only two ways to do that. That's on things that are sold, and that's on real estate. And you're going to be juggling with these issues very quickly because the tax revenue loss you're facing is imminent. So I, for one, think the worst tax in the world is a gross receipts tax. It's hidden. People they're not even aware they're paying it. It's abused. A store can shuffle sales away from a gross receipts tax into the wholesale side of its business. So there's a lot of room for abuse there that can never be caught because we don't have the forensic audit teams to be able to do that. So I, for one, don't feel guilty about not paying it because not paying a bad tax in my mind is a good thing. I'd like to see you guys get rid of it. I'm completely in favor of a sales tax. I think it's the only transparent form of tax. Then we get into all the other conversations earlier about scanning. If we could require scanning and if we had the right sales tax, I think the revenue generated would greatly improve. I think the government's cash flow would radically improve. So these are just a couple of thoughts, but those two principles, please don't create a tax system that favors off-island suppliers, and please only tax our consumers once as you're developing your plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for your support of the sales tax. I've been hearing that from the Chamber of Commerce. Dana?
Daphne Shimizu. Thank you. That's my sister. So first of all, I'm here actually on behalf of the insurance. I'm here on behalf of the insurance industry. But regarding the sales tax, I wanted to just kind of state something, comment. One thing that I have seen in some of the states is where they actually impose a sales tax, but not on essential items like food, clothing, pharmaceuticals. So if, my dear senators, you decide to impose such thing, I think that that really needs to be taken into consideration. You know, the cost of living is already high, and it's getting higher. So that's one point that I wanted to make because the sales tax is being discussed, and that's a possibility that they may happen. But in any event, I'd already had provided my written testimony to you. But thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Vice Speaker and Speaker Cruz, and thank you, members of the Committee on Finance and Taxation, for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Daphne Shimizu. I work for and I represent Stay Well Island Home Insurance Company, which is a local carrier that sells both health and other lines of insurance. So I'm here to talk a little bit about what is being termed as tax exemptions for domestic insurers. In 12 GCA, Section 58100, the legislature noted that although the initial goal of the qualifying certificate program was to entice investors into Guam, because the interest of such investors lied primarily in the benefit of off-island investors, there was a need to restructure the QC program. Per the code, while the territory, and this is all straight from the legislative findings and intent in the code, per the code, while the territory acknowledges their contribution to the island's welfare in terms of taxes, construction and employment opportunities on the low end of the pay scale, meaningful participation in terms of ownership and joint ventures has been sorely lacking. And so the restructuring of the QC program was intended to establish and expand the industry to diversify our island's economy. While our island's legislators noted this was a significant concern in the 1990s, back when it was, we had as a senator at that time, it was Senator Joe Agustin that actually brought to the table the issue of adding domestic insurers to the QC program. While our legislators noted that in the 1990s, the recent history of Island Home Insurance Company, which is a company that I do work for, actually illustrates that this is something which continues to exist today. After decades of underwriting insurance policies in the region, Zurich Insurance Guam, and I don't know if anybody recalls who Zurich is, but Zurich is actually the original carrier that was underwriting for Staywell Insurance. So Zurich actually decided in 2008 it was going to exit the Guam market because of declining business and because Guam did not fit into its business strategy anymore. It was then that Ms. Chen Yu Mak and Mr. Don Davis formed a company called IHIAC Inc. and purchased Zurich. The acquisition of Zurich ensured continuity of employment for Zurich's employees on Guam, and it saved Staywell's members from loss of health insurance and property and casualty coverage, which would have occurred if Staywell had shut down operations. I don't think it's any big secret that the health insurance industry on Guam has continued to be faced with increased cost due to the basic increase in the cost of health care in general. We're also faced in the insurance industry with multiple mandates which have resulted and continue to result in additional increases in our claims cost. For example, at the local level, there were 3 laws enacted in May 2017 which resulted in additional cost to insurance. Those were Public Law 34-2, Public Law 34-3, and Public Law 34-6. In addition to this, there have been bills introduced in 2017 and in 2018 which would impact the cost of health care on our island. Bill 131-34 in particular is an act which would implement rate review and medical loss ratio. And then there was also just recently, I think in the last week, Bill 227-34. In relation to the medical loss ratio, in a white paper issued in 2013, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners characterized the framework of the ACA as a 3-legged stool, where in the territories, which were the 5 insular areas, the 2 legs of the stool would be weakened, as the individual and employer mandates will not apply, and the funds available for subsidies will not be sufficient to cover all eligible individuals. Because of this, the risk of adverse selection in Guam and the other territories is significantly higher than it is in the other states. Although this is not a public hearing on Bill 230, I do reference Bill 230, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. On January 11, 2018, Bill 230-34 was introduced, which would eliminate the business privilege tax exemptions for 4 out of 46 exemptions allowed by law. The 4 industries which would be directly impacted if the bill is enacted are wholesalers, banks, hospitals, and domestic insurers. It is important to note that the health insurance industry on Guam is already faced with a new 4% health premium fee tax, which did not go through referendum, which was created when Bill 132-34, which now is Public Law 34-59, was enacted. As per Public Law 34-59, this health premium is called a health premium fee, is going to be administered by the Department of Revenue and Taxation, and the director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation would have the responsibility of developing the forms and instructions for the health premium fee for distribution to health insurance providers. In testimony submitted on Bill 132-34, This new health premium fee was referred to as a health insurance tax. In the committee report digest for Bill 132-34, now Public Law 34-59, the 4% health premium tax was characterized by one of our legislators as the equivalent to the 4% gross receipts tax that the insurance companies don't pay for because of a qualifying certificate. And this is actually a quote. Because the health premium fee is the GRT, this means that health premiums are already going to be subject to the 4% GRT. If the QCs for domestic insurance companies are not renewed, health premiums are subjected to both GRT and the equivalent of the GRT, which is called the 4% health premium fee, which is actually going to be administered by the Department of Revenue and Taxation. Then health premiums will be taxed at a total rate of 8%, which is actually double the GRT rate. Such a significant increase in the cost to write health business would be detrimental to health insurance providers on Guam and ultimately to our islands people who already have challenges obtaining health insurance coverage. In December 2017, the Office of the Public Accountability released its performance audit of the Department of Revenue and Taxation's gross receipts tax exemptions for the period October 2011 through September 2016. It's important to note that the objective of the performance audit was to quantify and determine the impact of gross receipts tax exemptions on Government of Guam revenues. The OPA noted that there are 46 specific BPT exemptions and that 25 exemptions were claimed on BPT returns, and I've attached Appendix 5 from the OPA's full report to my testimony for your reference. The recommendation of the OPA was for our legislators to utilize best practices as set forth by the GAO and the National Conference of State Legislatures to work with the Department of Revenue and Taxation to develop reports which would not only be used in evaluating the effectiveness of the exemptions, but also in evaluating and developing trends which would help GovGuam, DRT, to identify underreporting and non-reporting of GRT, where there's likely to be some revenues that are being lost. This, in effect, would help the legislature so that there's better oversight over such exemptions. In conclusion, my dear senators, qualifying certificates for domestic insurers are critical to keeping the cost of insurance down. The health insurance industry is already faced with a 4% health premium tax that did not go through referendum, which has been characterized by our legislators as the equivalent to the 4% gross receipts tax. The recommendation of the OPA was to develop means to evaluate all tax exemptions to determine whether they are achieving what they are set out to do and not to eliminate tax exemptions. And the health insurance industry itself is faced with additional mandates and regulations which will continue to drive the cost of health insurance up for our people. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you.
I'm looking at Senator Sinklis.
Just a couple things to add.
Yes.
You know, there is a consistent trend in the testimony or the statements that are being made here that I very much agree with, and that is that we have a lot of money out there that's just not being brought in that really should be brought in. And I just wanted to state on the record, Mr. Chairman, that we actually do have two bills that I've introduced. We've just recently heard them. One is for a whistleblower program to mirror the federal government whistleblower program for the non-payment of taxes, but apply it to our local taxes. So the honest businesses out there, if you know of a competitor that's not paying their taxes, if we pass this law, you guys can come forward and help us to bring that money in, and you greatly help DRT under collections. Another one is a mirror of the Federal False Claims Act. So we definitely have those things moving forward. I also wanted to note, Mr. Chairman, that again, one consistent trend that we're hearing today is that we're all very much concerned with the cost of living. One of the things that I wanted to just put out there, because somebody needs to say it, is if we're going to be exploring a sales tax, which I still have a problem with, and here's why. If we get rid of the GRT and do a sales tax, what guarantees do we have that the business community is going to lower their prices by 4% so that the sales tax can be applied to the register side as opposed to in the price? That's just something that we're going to have a very heart-to-heart conversation about, because otherwise, if prices don't go down by 4% and we add that sales tax on top of it, we're basically going to be doubling the tax onto the people of Guam. So if we're going to be exploring these difficult challenges, as Mr. Kernahan pointed out, it's going to require us to have a very frank conversation about the true cost to the consumer, the impact of gross receipts being removed, and the application of a sales tax if it does not result in a corresponding price decrease, and the need for us to all together as a community work together to make sure that everybody is who's supposed to be paying their taxes is actually doing so before we go out and increase fees and raise taxes further. Mr. Kernan, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Tim?
Thank you. Just a quick comment. If, in fact, we reimpose a gross receipts tax, it's a guarantee that the tax is going to go from 4 to 8% on consumers. That is an absolute guarantee. So the question is, I agree with you. I don't know what legislative means can be developed to induce retailers to lower their prices. I don't think that there's anything that can be done legally in that regard. But it's a given that if gross receipts is imposed on wholesalers, that tax will double and in some cases triple. I sell to Cost You Less sells to a lot of mom and pops. That's 3 transactions. So I still think a gross receipts tax is the way to go, and you guys are probably going to have to take a hit for that when prices go up if retailers don't lower their margins.
Senator Davis?
To clarify, at least on statements I made, the suggestion, at least coming from me, was to split the tax into 2. Service-based industries would be a GRT. It's more semantics than anything, while retail-type industries would be more of a sales tax. And that was based on the idea that specifically on consumer items, if we were to look at purchasing, so for example, one, it encourages people to purchase local. But based on current consumer laws and the way it's being done with the advent and promulgation of online purchases, is a focus on retaliatory taxes. Which means if I purchase, having 0 sales tax on Guam, if I purchase a product in California and we don't have a sales tax, I'm paying California state taxes on sales tax on that item that I'm purchasing from California. Whereas if we had a sales tax, there is the potential that our tax will trump their tax, and that 4% on that online purchase will return to Guam. And so actually it would probably be a benefit to the consumer in the long run, because whatever they're paying for will be paying a flat tax on whatever Guam sales tax is, as instead of the varying rates that other states have. And so that to kind of emphasize on the point I was going at, it wouldn't be an 8% overall tax. It would either be a 4% GRT on service-based industries, or 4% sales tax on consumption of items, still at 4% in total.
Okay. We have 2 other folks that also signed up to speak, and they're John DeKnight from Pepsi. Are you still here? Oh, okay. Please come forward. And then we have Thomas Hertzler from Chamber of Commerce. He left? Okay. And we do have written testimony from Mr. Flores, so we'll keep that quiet because you have a written testimony, so we'll just share them on our colleagues, unless you wanted to read it. You like the sales tax.
And I'll be quick. You can see all the interests that the bankers have. We're all here today. We're only together at other times when we're fixing rates. So they're taking it very seriously. And I wrote in the letter actual examples of how this would cause our banks to lose money. Not to break even, but in actual some loans to lose money. Right now we have a great 4% promo to pay off your credit cards, and the new bill proposes to swipe 4% of the principal and the interest. So that loan can't be made anymore if the bill's in place. But what I'm hearing today is that really, like Ken pointed out, we really don't know how far-reaching the effects are of what we're talking about. We're jumping into exemptions. And by the way, I'd like to say that we do not have an exemption. We do pay gross receipt taxes, and we're talking about sales tax being modernized. All the states are doing it. We as a territory are not. All the states tax banks on a net basis for either the GRT or the, business privilege tax or the franchise. It's always on a net basis. And I'm going to get up now and leave, go back to my chair, but I also remind you, credit unions don't pay any taxes. They don't pay a license fee. We pay $1,000 per ATM. They don't have to pay anything. They don't pay a business privilege tax. They don't pay an income tax. You tax us, it just makes us, their competitive advantage vis-a-vis tax is great. So business that we can't do because the loan becomes unprofitable, well, you can bet the people at the credit unions are cheering on this bill because all the business will go to them. We can't make a loan on which we don't make profit. Also, money is fungible. I'm not talking about the Hawaii banks, but they can make a loan in Hawaii much more easily than they can in Guam if it's more profitable. And that's why we want to keep our GRT calculation the same. But I am in favor of sales tax. I'm in favor of internet taxation. I don't mind paying the GRT on wholesale, on off-island sales as opposed to on-island sales. We have a couple of companies that do that. And that's it.
Thank you, Phil. Sir, for Pepsi.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll keep this quick. We echo everything that all the other wholesalers have said. I just wanted to add a real specific example to kind of make it very easy to see how this would play out if we took away the wholesale exemption. Some of our products, very popular products, are exclusively distributed on Guam by us. However, some retailers also have access to the same items through some of the large stateside wholesalers. Before I came to Guam, I worked for one of the largest wholesalers in the States, and I know that their margins are significantly lower than margins necessary to operate on Guam, just because the volume is so huge. So we have very real instances where we are forced to lower our price to our customers just to match what they can buy from the States on. And we don't like to do that, but sometimes we have to make the decision if we want to retain the business. If now we add an additional 4% cost to us, that decision's out of our hands. We won't be able to survive on it. And more items will become more profitable for the stateside wholesalers to start selling here. So again, take that to the logical conclusion. We lose revenues. We have to lay off employees who now are not paying income taxes, who now don't have income to buy things and pay gross receipts taxes. Now we can't pay our suppliers, so they're out of business, and it just snowballs. And the net effect really could be a very real loss in tax revenue as opposed to the increase in tax revenue that we're looking at. Okay, that's it.
Sir, could you state your name?
Yeah.
Name your company for the record.
Patrick Hines, Pepsi Bottling Guam.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And you know, folks, I think that's all we have, unless any of my colleagues want to ask any questions. So the folks present, and we have the OPA. You have? The horse is dead, but go ahead, Fernando.
Just one side note. I just so the record will reflect that, to my understanding of the banking industry, is Guam's uniqueness when it comes to taxation, because Guam is both the state and the federal government with regards to taxation. We have the territorial tax, in which mirrors the IRS code, which are as our federal level, and then you have the GRT. So I think that's a very important thing to look at with regards to either exemptions or taxations of both the banking and insurance industry, is what are the states doing, and are we already getting what we should be getting at the territorial tax level, which would be our federal equivalency. So I just want that doesn't get talked about often, but Guam's unique situation, different from the states, to where we have that federal responsibility with regards to taxation, and we do receive on that end with regards to our mirror of the federal taxation.
Thank you, Senator. But the question is, are we taxed the same way for business privilege tax or franchise tax as our banks in the states? And the answer is yes.
Senator Brooks.
Mr. Flores, could I ask you to read the last paragraph of your statement?
No, I passed out all my letters.
Could
May I see it?
read that for the record?
Is this the part where it's not mentioned in your report? I personally think the community, thank you. I personally think the community would accept an increase in the business privilege tax from 4 to 475. While we see what the recent, and two, while we see what the recent federal tax reform means to Guam revenues. I think we could also accept a sales tax, including on internet sales, and gosh, I shouldn't be saying this, because we have a little bit of property on island. Our property taxes are way too low.
Our report 4 years ago showed that. And we are in the process of doing another one, but I'm
And
not sure.
all the property taxes, if I'm correct, go to the Department of Education.
And let me just say, I'm not sure why we always have to wait for a reevaluation. What, sales are happening right now. Why can't that sale be the immediate basis upon which
That's
the
right.
new tax is based? Many states do that, and that was a recommendation we made. But no, we have to wait every 3 to 5 to 10 years to decide to revalue property, as opposed to taking it as it goes. The moment the sale is made, that's the basis upon which the real property tax should be done. But no, we don't do that.
That should be forthcoming very soon. I've been speaking with revenue and tax and maybe introducing that so that when you sell your property, that's what the tax will be falling.
But the reason I wanted Mr. Flores to read that, he says, I personally think the community would accept an increase in the gross in the BPT from 4% to 4.75%. So something is better than nothing is why I wanted him to read that out loud. Thank you, Mr. Flores.
Thank you, Phil. Can you have something?
Yes.
Want to add to that?
One of the things that I wanted to mention, as long as we're dancing with property taxes, right now we are the lowest property tax in the United States, which when you consider we're an island, a small island, that is ridiculous. If we doubled our property taxes today, we would still be 42% under Hawaii property taxes. So when I was preparing for this testimony, I did a little comparison. If I took my house and used Hawaii's rules, I would be paying $1,305 for the tax. Here, it's $200. I mean, if I followed Hawaii's rules, pardon me, let me go backwards. In Hawaii, I paid $1,305 a year for my house. Using that formula, here on Guam, I would be paying $234.08 for the same house. And I'm saying that, like Phil, as a property owner, that it is way too low. So if we were to even just raise property taxes to 2% of market and have the taxes kick in at resale. So in other words, if I didn't want to leave my home and families wanted to hold on to their house and property, as long as they didn't sell it, they wouldn't be subject to a reevaluation at market level. But when you look at, I think the formula is 0.7% on the building and some astronomically small number on the land. So technically speaking, if I were to take a house that I bought for $110,000 10 years ago and sell it for $500,000, we're still going to be looking at that 1/2% I mean, 0.7% and half of that from 10 years ago. Whereas if a person has the financial ability to spend $500,000 on a house, then they have the ability to pay 2% in property taxes to maintain the infrastructure that makes living in that house worthwhile.
One more comment.
That sounds good to a certain extent, because it's no different if you got money to come here and buy a business, you got money to pay their taxes. Senator Brooks?
I just want to close. First of all, thank you, senators, and for being here. Once I saw that the Trump taxes were passed, I said, oh boy, there goes Guam. But 39 other states are faced with the same problem. Why? Because 39 other states have a state income tax, all of which are used as the federal income tax is the basis of that. Some states do a simple formula, 10% of whatever you pay on the federal government, you pay to the state. Others have a little bit more complicated formula saying if you're this or that, you get this or that. But 39 states, their state income tax is an offshoot of the federal income tax. And 39 state legislatures are going to be facing the same problem that GovGuam is paying. As Mr. Kernahan said, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We do need to take action, and that's why I wanted Mr. Flores to reread his last paragraph, because it did show a little bit of light into that.
Thank you, Prima.
Huh?
Senator Terlay?
0.75 is better than nothing. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can see where it's going. Senator Terlay?
Yes, I just wanted to see if either Reverend Tax or the wholesalers themselves who are here are able to tell us from their preliminary review of the tax changes, are they going, I mean, it was, when this, one of the bills was explained to me, one of the background details that is not mentioned today is that those tax cuts might actually result in less taxes for these corporations, and so that this 4% is actually less than what they will be benefiting from the changes to the tax code. Have you seen that? Is that possible? I mean, that's how, it's my understanding. Reverend Tax, do you know if that's the case?
About income tax, yeah, I guess there's going to be some, you know, I guess less paying, because we're there's only one rate that they're imposing now. That's 21% rate versus a high rate of 35. So if any corporation that's paying higher than that is going to see you know, some savings. So
the government of Guam will be receiving less revenue because
yes,
people get to keep their income, and so it's my understanding that it's companies and many who are operating on Guam will benefit from this. Have you seen this?
If
Senator,
I'm sorry.
Thank you. The federal tax is on profits. Okay, the gross receipts is on sales. Our estimate is that we'd lose 25% of our sales if the gross receipts tax were applied to wholesalers. And I was impressed with how transparent Frank's presentation was. The margins he showed you, all of that, those are industry norms, and I'm not sure I would have taken off my clothes in front of you the same way he did. But what he portrayed was accurate. The other point I'd like to make is, for a wholesaler, the net margin is minuscule. It's a couple of points. That's all there is. And if this 4% makes us uncompetitive and I lose 25% of my sales, I could lose more than employees. I could lose every franchise I have, Procter & Gamble, Kellogg's, Hormel. I could lose every one of these because all of a sudden our sales are going to collapse and we wouldn't have a company anymore. This is something we take extremely seriously.
Well, what do you expect the effect of the tax changes to be on you're saying on your income tax on net? And yeah, compared to, I mean, can you give us some kind of comparison?
Again,
besides reduced sales.
Are we assuming that there will not be a 4% gross receipts tax applied?
Okay, let's start with that. If you assumed that, yeah, would there be an increased profit margin then?
There will be an increased profit margin, and it will be spent on equipment and we just moved into a new warehouse. It's taken us since 1988 to get to own our own nice warehouse, and so we're going to reduce our debt, and we would buy equipment and invest more in IT, and we would hire more people, and we are always increasing salaries of the people that work for us.
Well, I know I've seen companies in the States already promise that is exactly where their savings were going to go, towards salaries, and there's a lot of discussion here about raising the minimum wage, and of course, yeah, I'd just like to know, how are we as lawmakers how can we know what the companies are going to do with the savings while the government is not receiving that money anymore? Can we predict how the companies will act? Is there any kind of, or can you give me, I guess I'm going to rely on Reverend Tax to give us some more information about exactly how much, I guess we know the raw numbers, but percentages, I guess, versus...
Those were the best I can tell you. Are some of us going to lie? Yeah, some of us are going to lie, and we're not going to do what we said we're going to do. To a good point that Ken made about low wages, something else I'd like you to consider. A company like mine, which is pretty traditional Guam-type company, we have a 401k, we have medical benefits for family members as well as the employee. Our effective minimum wage, if we add in that benefit stream, is over $11 an hour. So how we look at minimum wage, do our people need more? Yeah, are we paying? We're always trying to pay them more. But it's not to say that everyone is paying $8.50 or what that number is. If you look at the total benefit package a lot of us have, it's pushing $11 an hour. So, and we want to augment that. We pay a very high percentage of our employees medical insurance.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I'll just chime in because I know we want to leave. We looked at, okay, our tax rate's going down. We're having a presentation to our board next week by Deloitte Touche, what it's going to mean to us as a company, what's going to mean to us as individuals. But any things that we're actually kind of excited about doing as far as raises, as far as going back into CapEx, as far as upgrading IT to always be ahead of the cybersecurity war, they're all on hold because of this bill. We've just put everything on hold because it really does scare us. But I can tell you one thing. If you're taking $70 million out of the income from wholesale companies, that already reduces their income tax by 21%, $14,700,000. So we're already down from $70 million down to $56 million, while I taking in what other effects it has across the economy.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Can I just make 2 quick points?
Good. Real quick.
The stateside wholesalers that we would be now competing more directly with would also get the same income tax benefit, so that's kind of a moot point as far as that goes. And then with the Tim's numbers, let's do a real simple example. On a $100 sale, the GRT would be 4% or $4. Tim's right in that a couple of points is typically our net income margin. So on that $100 sale, that would be a $2 net income. The income tax corporate going from 35 to 21%, 14% decrease. So the savings on that $2 income would be 28 cents. So we would be increasing our taxes by $4 and then saving 28 cents on the backside. So yeah, that's not a good thing for us.
No. Senator San Nicolas?
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. I'm just all the conversations about increasing taxes that just have me all fidgety. I don't think we should be increasing taxes. I want to make that very clear. And as a matter of fact, I wanted to just follow up with Reverend Tax on a couple of items. Not only do we have the cigarette stamps that we're looking forward to bring in more of our cigarette revenue because of the non-payments that we suspect are out there, but we also passed Public Law 3454. I'm sorry, 1 second. Yeah, 3454, Public Law 3453, Public Law 3452. And all 3 of these public laws that I introduced were to direct you guys, basically, to come up with how much we're losing to taxes that are not being collected from these types of situations. So, for example, Public Law 3454 requires you guys to determine how much income taxes is not being collected by off-island businesses and mortgage financing activities, banking, insurance, trust, investment, other entities like that are off-island, because in the Organic Act, the way it's written is that any income derived from Guam, the taxes of which should be remitted to the territory. And so if a company is earning money from Guam, even if they're reporting their taxes elsewhere, we're supposed to be bringing in that money in Section 30. We should be filing that as a Section 30 claim. To my understanding, the only Section 30 money that we really go after are the military salaries, the federal salaries. But we passed Public Law 3454, and it gave you guys 180 days, and that was 90 days ago. So we're halfway there, and I'm hoping you guys got started on that work to figure out how much of that Section 30 money we're not recovering. And it's not just those entities, but also another one that we particularly wanted to target was, and it was mentioned here earlier, was the contractors. And so there's a website actually, usaspending.gov, that lists all the federal contractors, all the contracts that were awarded on the island, the amounts. And part of the law that I passed there was for you guys to reconcile that database with what you guys are collecting on the tax and figure out who hasn't paid and who has. And then the other law that we passed was the air transportation taxes. Since the 1970s, the people of Guam have been paying an air transportation tax on every single airline ticket that we buy. But that tax has not been remitted to the territory. And that tax actually goes to the FAA, but again, the way the Organic Act is written, those taxes should be remitted to the territory. And so that is another Section 30 claim that we can be filing. And based on our estimates, that could be upwards of $100 million. So aside from all that Section 30 money that we have not collected or made claim for all these years, and I think we really should get a back payment on, we also have the whistleblower laws that we're introducing, the tax stamp laws that we're introducing, and I think that the testimony from Ms. Shimizu really hit the nail on the head. Before we even begin to look at the increasing in taxes, and as much as we have to figure out how we're going to keep things afloat, we have a lot of unreconciled amounts out there that we're owed already, and these are public law. So I'm hoping that, you know, we in the beginning of this hearing, we discussed the 90 days has already passed on the tax stamps. So we got to get that rolling. But I also wanted to just remind you guys not to forget about these other public laws, because there is a ticking clock on those as well. We gave you 180 days. And so I'm hoping that we can get some feedback soon, because all this discussion about tax increases is just really, I mean, our cost of living here is already so high. And before we go out and try and take more dollars out of people's pockets, I want to make sure that every single dollar that we're already supposed to be bringing in is coming in. So I'm not going to ask for an update on those particular bills right now, because I did give you more time, but I just want to put that on the record that, you know, we haven't forgotten. There is one bill, however, that one law that did pass that we have not seen anything on, and that is the Public Law 3451, which requires you guys to provide to us on a monthly basis consolidated tax collection reports. I don't know if the speakers received any, but I have not seen any. And this passed since September 30th. And the purpose of that is just to see what our collections looks like, because, I mean, we've had this discussion years ago. We have a very big outstanding amount of collections that we also should be bringing in as well. So if we could be getting that report, and then if we could just have those items followed up with as well, I think that we can, as much as possible, put off this conversation of raising taxes until we're absolutely certain that we're bringing everything in that we're supposed to. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Sinclair. As a matter of fact, most of the bills you wrote, my staff has wrote that down. We're going to keep that on the radar.
Thank you,
because we'll be following up with you on, but I know Senator Esteves, you still want to make one more comment, and then we're going to wrap it up. Okay, folks? Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a side note, I mean, I know part of this is exemptions, but also a precursor into the updated tax laws. Have you started preparing, and with the increase in funding, have you started planning ahead, and what's your plan and outlook, if you have one yet, to prevent the pass-through tax loopholes that are already expected to be present with the new, whether they pay themselves a small amount and then pay themselves most at the end of the year, whichever is going to be more tax favorable. But there's a lot of caution out there already that these types of methods are going to reduce collections for both the state governments and federal government overall. But is this something you're aware of, and have you started preparing for it?
Yes, we are aware of those things, but those are coming up. They're not in, I mean, they're in effect right now, but as they file, and you know, those are the things that we verify, or we go to the selection procedures and all these things. Everybody's treated equally. So there's things that we do to get into those things where when you say pre-audit and all those things. So we'll get into those things.
But do you have any points right now that will present potential red flags of fraud or abuse under the current tax system, only because this is a new thing? Have you even started developing those?
Yeah, well, like I said, when those returns are actually filed, then they go through the process like everybody else. In other words, you'll go through the procedures, and you know, like any industry, then we'll get into those things.
Okay, I'll just say this one more time. Completely new tax law.
Yes.
Completely new, brand new loopholes. So there, as of right now, I don't know of any standards or procedures as part of a regular audit portion. But is this something that we're being preemptive of to prevent any loss of income until those standards are forthcoming? Is this something that we're already addressing? Because Guam has a lot of LLCs and a lot of subsidiaries, and there can be a lot of finagling in the financials to avoid paying out taxes or in things that are more favorable, that really borderline fraud. I'm just saying, are you aware of this loophole?
Like I said, there's a lot of requirements that are coming down, a lot of changes, and our staff every year we go through the process of looking at all the changes in the law. So in the long run, we'll basically look into those things. In other words.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. Mr. Camacho and Ms. Benito, I would only look forward that we would be seeing more collections out there. There's folks that owe property tax, and I don't know if you have the auction policies in place yet. And if people, I'm not saying threaten the folks you don't pay your property tax, but you know everybody's paying their taxes. You owe, you pay, you move on. Okay, and then at the same time, we need to make sure that technology is in place. The OPA has stressed this for over a decade now. Get with the Office of Technology, do what you need to do, because the budget is coming up and Speaker Cruz is going to be looking out for that. And if he doesn't see a movement in that change, there may not be an increase your way. And that's just how the math would be. We may have to reach out to DOA and says, if you're not using it, well, OTEC, you may not exist either. Because number one, as it's been mentioned, the tax reform, the government has to right size. It can't keep growing. There's not enough money out there. Okay, so all I'm going to ask you is just get your reports going. Please help out Senator Brooks on completing her report. Yes.
I just wanted to mention those two bills or those two laws that Senator San Nicolas mentioned. We are working on those already, and you know, basically talking about working on the those fighters, off-island fighters, Section 30. We've been working that for many years already. And also for the construction industries and the military, we've been working for us for many years, and you know, that's the reason why we're getting all these revenues that are coming in. So, but just to let you know, I mean,
well, something to consider, Mr. Camacho and Ms. Benito. Take a look at your organization. Maybe you need to change your organization, because it's evident you know, you're borrowing from one of your division to help what you need to get done. And it's not just working. You've got one person, two person entrapped. You need to take a look at your organization. And this will just wrap up. Just take a look at what you got. Help us when we ask for questions, when we inquire what's going on. Just give us the data and we'll move on. Because Senator Snickers will love that. You give him the data, he's happy. He can use it for the good of the people. That's what it's for. That's what we all were looking out for the good of the people, nothing more.
Yes.
Unless you have anything else, I'm going to close it.
Yes.
It's almost
I
5.
sure do, because I appreciate all the testimony here, and everything that they mentioned was not something new, because that's on the table. It has been. We've talked about it, increasing real property tax, all the reports that are due. We are doing our military projects. We're doing all of that. Now, that's tax administration. You have questions from Senator Esteves here. Those are all tax administration. How come he doesn't know? Because those are our job. So let us do our job, and then, because we already shared, one of his bills was on Section 30. We asked our IRS counterparts, and they said, no, we refuse to share that information. You know, all they get is the bottom line, but everything else in between, those are all tax administration. So we're doing our job. You have your job to do. We have ours. So we're doing the best we can. And, you know, like you said, let's do a reorganization of our people, and that's great. You're giving us the staff. We're working on that. It's going to get better. That's where we want to be. And I'm glad that that 4.75 was reintroduced, because nobody likes to pay more tax. But if you're saying, you know, remove the exemptions, then they're all going to be here opposing that. But the 4.75, we all know there's so many things coming up There's the GMH that we absolutely have to fund. There's the Trump Tax Act that we absolutely have to beware of because we all know it's going to affect us tremendously. So that being said, you know, everything's rev and tax, rev and tax. We are doing our job. So just, again, all these mandates on us is the same people that are doing those work. So just do your job as a legislature, we'll do our job as executive. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Benito. I don't think there's anybody else that wants to speak. Bob, you want to speak? No. I don't know. Joe Bradley probably was like, he'll come off his own economic summit soon. There being none, the committee will conclude the roundtable meeting with the Department of Revenue and Tax and the Office of the Public Auditor. Folks, if you have any testimony you would want to submit, please submit it to my Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation. Submit it via email, Senator Joe S. and Agustin @gmail.com. My office located at Rand Care Building, 2nd floor, Suite 3, 761 South Marine Corps Drive, Tamuning, Guam. Jesus Masi for your attendance and participating in today's roundtable. And for those at home, thank you for watching. Good evening.